Good morning, everyone. Welcome in. See lots of names trickling in here. Welcome to the webinar. Happy to have you here this morning. We're going to give a minute or two here for all attendees to find their way into the GoToWebinar here, and then we will go ahead and get rolling. So again, good morning, welcome, and we are happy to have you here. All right, good morning and welcome everyone. It is 8:01. We're going to go ahead and get our webinar for today started. My name is Bram Briskhorn. I am one of your operator certification blanking on the own coordinators here with ADEQ. And this event, as I mentioned, is an operator certification offering. So any of you operators out there will be able to get some PDHs for attending the event today. We are discussing the topics of cybersecurity and emergency preparedness. Here on GoToWebinar, if you have not been to one of these webinars before, as I mentioned, PDHs are available. There is an agenda that you can download to upload to your operator certification portal. There should be a little section on the GoToWebinar panel that says handouts. You can click that, and there you can download files of the presentations from all of our presenters today, as well as the agenda. If you're not seeing that handout section, or if you need to get to it later, all attendees today will be getting emailed a copy to a share file, and that will have all of the presentations. And if you need the agenda, just let us know that you'll be able to upload for your PDHs. Webcams are disabled, all attendees are muted, and the webinar is being recorded. So this will be available for viewing at later dates on the ADEQ YouTube channel if you'd like to see any of the presentations again, or share them along to some colleagues, or if you need them at a future date for PDHs, you are able to watch some pre-recorded webinars for up to 10 PDHs per certification period. If you do have any questions during the webinar, there is a question drop-down box as well on the GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to type your questions in there, and one of our panelists or organizers will be able to answer those questions live or as the webinar continues on. And of course, if you have any questions, shoot us a call or email at the opcert program. If you're viewing in a group today, all that I ask is that all of your group members are registered for the webinar, especially if you are seeking PDHs for the webinar. We need to log who's here. But if you're viewing in a group, that is A-OK. Just make sure that all the attendees are registered. Today's agenda will be going over a couple different cybersecurity topics, from best practices to assessments, some post-cyber attack responses. We'll discuss incident command system overviews as they are related to cybersecurity, and then we'll get into some risk and resiliency assessments, emergency response plan requirements, and we'll end with drought contingency planning as we ease our way across the spectrum of cybersecurity to physical emergency preparedness. Certified operators that are with us this morning, just some reminders for you before we get going. Make sure you're checking your portal accounts regularly. It's important that you know what certifications you have, know their effective date, know their expiration date. Be checking in on your portal account regularly. Make sure you know when your certifications are going to expire, and make sure that you are able to obtain the required PDHs for those renewals. Remember, it's 30 PDHs per certification period. So if you have 3 certifications that all have overlapping dates, you can use the same 30 PDHs to renew all of those. But as a best practice, make sure that you are uploading PDHs as you obtain them. It's not a requirement. ADEQ is not going to force you to turn around this afternoon and upload your PDHs that you obtained today, but it is certainly a best practice to keep track. We don't want to see anyone losing their certs last minute because you were a couple PDHs short. So make sure you're keeping an eye on that. As a final note, your certifications are your responsibility. So make sure you know when your certs expire. If you have a boss or colleague who is renewing or managing your certs for you, just make sure you know that if they do something wrong, it's on you. At the end of the day, your certifications are your responsibility. This is also why we recommend using your own personal emails, operators, for logging in rather than a company email. If you move companies or whatever the situation, you may have to reach out to us, which is no problem. We can update your email address at any time to log in. Right on topic for today, there was a pretty big phishing attempt that went out to all operators a week or two ago. Be aware of these. I'm sure Jocelyn is going to get into some more details on phishing here shortly, but this was the email, and I'm sure many of you operators did see this. This was not from ADEQ. This was a phishing attempt of some sort. A couple things to note here, and we'll get into best practices today as well, but note the sender was not from ADEQ. If you ever get an email from the government, it will be a .gov address. It will be azdeq.gov if we're trying to communicate with you, whether that's opcert at azdeq.gov or do not reply at azdeq.gov. All official communications will come from a government address. This is also an older version of our logo. And the real red flag here is it has a sense of urgency to it. This sent note, this verification link below will expire in 24 hours and we'll revoke your license if you don't respond in 24 hours. That's an unreasonable request and not something ADEQ is going to ask of you. So just keep an eye out. A lot of your information as operators, your operator name, ID, email, and not physical address, but general address that you have. It's usually just city that you'll have in your portal account is public information. So these phishing attempts can occur. Just make sure you're looking for emails from azdeq.gov to avoid this. We are also switching over fully to Qualtrics. If you get regular emails from us, if you're on our mailing list, we are no longer using Gov Delivery. We are using Qualtrics. So go ahead and scan this QR code if you're not on our mailing list, but you would like to receive every other week, an email will be sent out at the very least that will have all of the upcoming events, all of the opportunities to get PDHs. We're not here to send you a bunch of spam. We're not going to flood your inbox. But if you want some regular notifications on training events like this one today, it's good to get on that mailing list. And of course, operators, if you ever have any questions, even system managers, owners, whatever it is, if you have questions related to operators and operator certification, reach out to us. If we cannot answer your question directly, we will get you to the right contact. So that's opcert at azdeq.gov. You can call us by phone there as well. And there's lots of other resources available on the ADEQ website where you can check out more about the operator certification program. Before we get things rolling, just a few poll questions to gauge who we have in attendance today. There's just 2 of these, so I'm going to launch these polls, and if you want to submit your multiple choice answer, that would be very helpful. First question, which role is most applicable to you? DRC, Direct Responsible Charge, Certified Operator, Water System Owner, Manager, or Other? I'll leave this up for just a minute and let some answers come in. Perfect. I will close the poll in just a second here. Thank you for your answers. Beautiful. Looks like we got primarily certified operators, a couple water system owners and managers as well, which is great to see. I think this training will be useful for all sorts and others in attendance. I hope you get some good value. This is cybersecurity and emergency preparedness. It is certainly useful for many walks here. And our second poll for our certified operators in attendance today: what classifications of certifications do you hold? Water, wastewater, both, or not applicable? Perfect. I'll leave it up for just one more second here, and we'll see what we got. Lots of both. That's great to see. It's useful to have certifications on both sides, and then a lot of water representation as well. Thanks again for answering those polls. And as always, if there's specific training content that you would like to see, something that you feel is lacking, that's another thing you can reach out to the opcert program with. We'd love to hear your feedback in that regard. With that, we are ready to begin the webinar properly. Again, make sure you get the agenda downloaded. Make sure you upload that for your PDHs. And thanks again, attendees, for being here. I will pass the mantle over to Jocelyn with TEP. She's going to be going over cybersecurity best practices for us this morning. Jocelyn, if you're ready, I can send the screen to you.
Yep, I am ready for you to share that over.
Excellent.
Okay, and then can you see the big screen before I continue?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, good. Thank you for confirming. So, hi everyone, my name is Jocelyn. I will be doing the presentation for cybersecurity best practices and a quick intro about me. So I wanted to make it a little fun. So I am a proud fur parent to a little dachshund, love to travel, and I started in cybersecurity as a SOC analyst for a few years, and then I moved into cybersecurity culture and awareness. So I have seen both the technical side and the more like social side of cybersecurity. And just a little, first up, we have a quick video about the evolving cybersecurity landscape with Ron Green, the Chief Security Officer of MasterCard, and Brian Johnson, before I start going into kind of like what is phishing, what are all the attacks, and the best practices. So let me go ahead and go on to the next screen. And then Bram, I believe.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a go. I'm not seeing the video option here. I believe it's because the webinar is being recorded. It might not want to play.
Try taking control for your screen, Bram. Let's see if it pops up.
I'll give it a go that way. Let's see. This is YouTube here. I believe the audio will try to play through my microphone rather than through GoToWebinar, but we're gonna, let me know if you can hear anything.
No audio yet.
No audio for me either.
All right, then we might not have it then, unless you want to try just playing it through your own microphone.
Okay, yeah, I can go ahead and try playing it through my microphone. If not, we might just have to scrap the video.
No worries, we'll give it a shot.
Okay, so let me see. And then is everyone able to hear it? Fine.
It's a little quiet. Maybe if you click the CC, we can have the sub captions on
Okay.
and do it that way.
We're moving into a new time when it comes to cybercrime. We're moving out of its infancy, even out of its crazy adolescence, and it's getting grown up. We're seeing more volume. We're seeing more articulated attacks. We're seeing much more sophisticated attacks. And I really think we're seeing this widening of the attack plane, where before it might have been a leak or a hack or some fraud. Now we're seeing it sort of stretching across into the social arena, sometimes into the physical arena. As we think about the future, we're going to see that attack plane get wider and wider and wider. It doesn't get easier from here. Yeah. It actually gets more complex.
Right. They work well across their group, really thinking about a new idea, a new way to, share the wealth or to promote an attack. And they don't care about the boundary that's, well, this is where MasterCard ends and this is where the card holder is. They don't care. They will run through all of that in order to achieve their end.
Well, I think you make a good point, because it is partially about sharing. We're starting to see this now, not just as an industry. We're seeing this as an ecosystem problem. We're actually seeing this where it's bad for business. It's not bad for a single business. It's not bad for a single ecosystem. It's bad for multiple businesses. So I do think we're going to see this coming era of needed increased collaboration when it comes to the defenders. But I often think about, what can somebody do today? So we start thinking about companies. Part of it is understand that this is here, that this is not new, that this is coming into its maturity, and that it only gets more complex and only gets wider. And so this notion of wait and see, that's over. It's not time to wait and see. That this is a business and a global business reality. You have to be an active participant in that future. You have to figure out what you want to do, what will be good for business, what will be bad for business. Because if you're not, if you're a passive participant, then you're letting somebody else design your future. And I can tell you that never goes well.
Okay, so hopefully everyone was able to hear and or see the subtitles. So going on to the next slide. So here are some national headlines that I wanted to share some highlights on. So some national cyber attacks, as you can see, there have been many cyber attacks on different utilities this year. Other industries suffer from same type of attacks, such as United Healthcare. The health sector is a very big one. Utilities are also very high on that list. So even here locally in Tucson, there have been many cyber attacks that include data breaches. So like TUSD is our public school sector. The city of Tucson was hit, and a more recent one, middle last year, was Casino del Sol that was hit here. And so just kind of looking at the recent stats and headlines, so we can see that here are the ones that have been targeted, have been critical infrastructure, and that includes and is not limited to pipelines, water utilities, electric utilities. There have been an FBI statement about China. There have been data breaches, and then financial crimes and ransomware. So what is a cyber attack? I want to touch upon this before we actually go on to best practices. So you can see right here, it's any malicious attack on a computer system, network, or device to gain access and information. So going off the list, so there's malware, which includes ransomware, phishing, and there is going to be more information on these in the next slides. And there's man-in-the-middle attacks. So these are when an attacker positions themselves between a user and an application or service to impersonate one of the parties or eavesdrop in on the conversation. There is denial of service attacks. So these are when a malicious actor, the attacker, aims to render a computer or other device unavailable to its intended users by interrupting the device's normal functions. And the last one, password attacks. So as the name implies, these are various methods that the attackers use to maliciously authenticate into password protected accounts. And going on to why cybersecurity is important. So cybersecurity is the practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks. At an individual level, a cybersecurity attack can result in everything from identity theft to extortion attempts to the loss of important data. And everyone relies on critical infrastructure like power plants, hospitals, and financial service companies. Securing these and other organizations is essential to keeping our society functioning. As we saw in the previous video, the threat landscape is constantly evolving, and we have to do our part to stay in front of the attackers. So now going into the big topic, phishing. I know this is a very popular one. So in a phishing attack, cyber criminals use deceptive emails to phish for information and lure people into falling for scams. These emails are carefully designed to trick you into revealing information, login credentials, or sensitive data, or they may secretly install dangerous software, or what we like to call malware, short for malicious software, that compromises your computer and the files on it. So phishing emails typically pressure you to act quickly, as we saw in the example that Bram showed us, without thinking. So because they try to pressure you to act quickly, you're not really thinking to check the link before clicking, looking at who it's being sent from, and all of the other potential red flags. They play upon these strong emotions such as curiosity, fear, or greed. And these psychological manipulation tactics are sometimes known as some social engineering. Phishing emails also use a variety of technical tricks to steal information. So malicious web links, you're asked to click on a link, or QR codes are a very popular one now. They act as the same thing, but you're scanning instead of just simply clicking the link. And they then take you to an imposter website, which we like to call credential harvester. So as the name implies, once you enter your password and username into that fake login page, the attacker automatically gets those and they try to log in with that information. Or they can lead you to a site infected with malware. And phishing emails can also have malicious attachments, where you're urged to open an unexpected attachment that contains malware. Or they can lead you to enter in data in fraudulent data entry forms. So like I mentioned, a credential harvester, you're prompted to fill in sensitive information like user IDs, passwords, credit card data, and phone numbers. And the scary thing about that is that once it's entered, the attacker has it immediately. So best case, if you know someone that has fallen for a phishing scam, please contact your IT department immediately. The sooner you contact them, the sooner they can keep your account safe and secure by resetting any passwords and doing any additional triaging on their end. So phishing is the #1 attack vector. So cyber criminals send an estimated 3.4 billion phishing emails per day. Very, very big number, and with the looks of it, the number is only going to be increasing. So this is 1.2% of all emails sent. And in 74% of breaches, human factors played a role, encompassing social engineering tactics, mistakes, or misuse. Phishing is the leading initial attack vector, responsible for 41% of incidents, and there's a reported loss of $17,700 for every minute due to phishing attacks. So now going into what is malware. So malware, kind of going with phishing, also very common attack. So the definition for this is any type of software created to harm or exploit another piece of software or hardware. Short for malicious software, as I mentioned earlier. Malware is a collective term used to describe viruses, ransomware, spyware, trojans, and any other type of code or software built with malicious intent. So it's this malicious intent that characterizes the malware definition. The meaning of malware is the damage it can inflict on a computer system, server, or network, and it's the how and the why that separates one type of malware from the next. So what are the signs of a malware infection? So frequent crashes and freezing. Some malware will cause your computer to freeze or crash, while other types will cause crashes by consuming too much RAM or driving up CPU temperatures. Deleted or corrupted files. Malware often deletes or corrupts files as part of its plan to cause as much chaos as possible. Lots of pop-up ads. So this is more targeted for adware. Adware's job is to spam you with pop-ups. Other types of malware may cause pop-up and alerts as well. And then browser redirects. If your browser keeps sending you to sites you aren't trying to visit, a malware attack may have been made, and changes to your DNS settings may have been made as well. And your contacts are receiving strange messages from you. So some malware spreads by emailing or messaging the victim's contacts. So secure messaging apps can help protect you from communications from eavesdroppers. And if you see a ransom note, very telltale sign that this is a ransomware attack. So ransomware wants you to know it's there. It'll take over your screen with a ransom note demanding payment to get your files back. A ransom note is an easy way to tell what malware is on your computer. And then unfamiliar apps. So malware can install additional apps on your device. If you see new programs that you didn't install yourself, it may be the result of a malware attack. So getting a little more specific, I wanted to touch on ransomware. So just because ransomware is one of the type of malware attacks that is the most common and causes the most financial loss to companies. So in 2023, 2/3 of critical infrastructure operators, so 67% in the oil, energy, and utility sectors suffered a ransomware attack compared to 59% of all industries. In addition, attacks on those critical infrastructure sectors affected an average of 62% of systems, far higher than the 49% of systems across all industries impacted during a ransomware attack. And going into what ransomware can do, so they encrypt and then they exfiltrate data. So encryption is a form of data security in which information is converted to ciphertext. Ciphertext is an encrypted text transformation from plain text, so the normal text that you see, using an encryption algorithm, and ciphertext can't be read until it has been converted back into plain text, so decryption with a key. And in a ransomware attack, they don't give you the key until you pay the ransom, and even then, it's not guaranteed that they will give you that key to decrypt your files. And then data exfiltration, also known as data extrusion or data exportation, is data theft. So what that is the intentional, unauthorized, covert transfer of data from a computer or another device. So what does it mean to be cyber secure? So for people, everyone must understand and comply with basic data protection and privacy security principles like choosing strong passwords, being wary of attachments and emails, especially if you're not expecting it or don't know the sender, and backing up your data. And processes, organizations must have a framework for how they deal with both attempted and successful cyber attacks. And technology, so technology is essential to giving organizations and individuals the computer security tools needed to protect themselves from cyber attacks. 3 main entities must be protected. So endpoint devices like computers, smart devices and routers, networks, and the cloud. Common technology used to protect these entities include next generation firewalls, domain name system, so DNS filtering, malware protection, antivirus software, and email security solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and touch on the recent failures that we have seen happen locally. So I like to look back on this quote by John Wooden. So failure is not fatal, but failure to change might be. So never take failure just as a point blank period. It's always good to improve and look at the lessons learned. So I touched upon some of these cyber attacks. So there was the TUSD, which is the oldest one on here. So they were hit in a ransomware attack. This occurred after a user clicked on an untrustworthy link, and then a letter was found in their printer explaining what happened, and they could remediate the situation by paying. And 29,000 individuals may have had their private and confidential information stolen. So through investigation, it was discovered that current and former employees, students, parents, and their dependents were victims of this data breach. And the Casino del Sol was also a ransomware attack. So they reported multiple disrupted services, and according to multiple reports from the hotel casino, customers could not check into their rooms, use local ATMs, or obtain casino credit. The entry point or root cause of the attack has not been disclosed. And then going a little more broad. So this is all of Arizona, but it was also a nationwide attack. So Arizona pharmacies, they reported having issues getting their prescriptions in February of 2024. And then as one of the nation's largest healthcare technology companies, they say that they were a victim of a cyber attack from a hacker group called Black Cat, and they had to pay $22 million to the hackers. So the company was not protected by MFA, multi-factor authentication, and this is stated as the main weak point in this attack. So each one of these companies, So each one of these companies had a different tactic for working through their cyber breaches. Most released a lessons learned when the incident had been resolved and utilized outside resources such as CISA and the FBI. And going into some recent notable successes at our company, just to kind of show that this is the reason why it's good to be attentive and to just sort of be on top of it and not just waiting for something to happen. And it also kind of shows that these attacks do happen. So starting with the first one, it was an invoice scam. So at the end of July of last year, we were able to stop a payment to an attacker of more than $300,000. A small vendor we work with was compromised and the attacker hijacked an email thread. The tools we have in place were able to intercept the malicious email, and our cybersecurity team was able to ensure that payment was not made. We learned that the small vendor does not have an IT security team, and the attacker set up a typo squatting domain by stealing information in an email. So Microsoft versus Macrosoft. And even if the attacker made it through our team and software and made it to the procurement and financial teams, they have been trained and have their processes nailed down for verifying account changes. And the second incident here, so this was a ransomware attack, 2 ransomware attacks. So our parent company reported that 2 of our subsidiaries got hit by ransomware, and our cybersecurity team was called in to help mitigate the risk. We went to them and they came to us to train and learn, and we helped them by giving a list of our technology stack and better ways to go ahead and mitigate those risks in the future. So some cybersecurity tips for your mobile devices. So setting up pins and passwords, this is the first line of defense in case your phone is lost or stolen. And then the second one, backing up and securing your data. So most phones do this on the cloud these days. Apple and Google both offer these services, and only install apps from trusted sources. So do a quick check before downloading anything onto your phone and make sure that the app is legitimate. You can do this by looking up reviews using the verified store app, and many apps from untrusted sources contain malware that once installed, they can start stealing your information, installing viruses, and can cause harm to your phone's contents. And understand app permissions before you accept them. So you should be cautious about granting application access to personal information on your phone, or otherwise letting the application have access to perform functions on your phone. Make sure to also check the privacy settings for each app before installing, and accept patches to your phone software. So by keeping your operating system current, you can reduce the risk of exposure to cyber threats. Many of the patches contain bug fixes and security patches. And then be smart on open Wi-Fi networks. Always use caution when accessing a Wi-Fi network open to the public. Your information can be an easy target because with public Wi-Fi, sometimes they don't have a password, or they have a password that is just posted right there at the front. If you know the password, chances are the attackers have access to that password as well. So next, cybersecurity tips for avoiding malware. So malware is very scary, and we want to make sure that you don't get any sort of type of malware onto your devices. So when it comes to malware, prevention is better than a cure. Incorporate the following tips into your digital lifestyle to minimize your malware risk and protect yourself from a potential attack. So the very first one, don't trust strangers online. Strange emails, abrupt alerts, fake profiles, and other scams are the most common methods of delivering malware. If you don't know what exactly something is, don't click on it. So this can range from phishing emails to even random LinkedIn messages. Always have caution, and then double check your downloads. So from pirating sites to official storefronts, malware is often lurking just around the corner. So before downloading, always double check that the provider is trustworthy. And then be careful where you browse. So malware can be found literally anywhere, but it's most commonly found on websites with poor backend security. So if you're visiting a large reputable site, your risk of encountering malware is minimal. And then always update your software. So outdated software may have security vulnerabilities, which developers routinely patch with software updates. So always install updates for your operating systems and other software as soon as they become available. And then talking about updating, so tips regarding updates and why it's so important to update your devices. So the importance of software updates. Keeping your software and operating system up to date is an important step towards ensuring your information is safe, your device is secured and working properly, and your programs and system remain compatible with each other. Software updates reduce security flaws. So old software is full of security flaws. Over time, hackers find new ways to break through what was, at one time, the best available protection. Once these cybercriminals break into a system, they can spy on your computer, implant dangerous malware, or even use what they find in your system to commit identity theft. And software updates can protect your data. Your data is at risk of being stolen, sold, and used against you by criminals. But the risk of being hit by a data breach is much higher if you're using outdated software, as is the risk of accidentally destroying or corrupting your files. So updating your software to the latest versions can close off any vulnerabilities that let the hackers in. Updates can also correct problems that could corrupt your files while making sure that they're compatible with the newest versions of the programs that you use. And software updates improve performance. If you want to make sure your computer is faster, one of the easiest ways is to update your software. Older software versions operate using legacy code. So what legacy code is old computer source code that is no longer supported in the standard hardware and environments. But engineers are constantly making tweaks to improve performance and reduce resource usage. So reliably high performance is vital for running multiple programs simultaneously, watching high definition videos, playing the newest games on the personal side of things, and even taking the best pictures and videos, and even browsing the internet. Software updates can also help protect others. So the internet is a giant interconnected network of devices. Because of the links between systems all over the globe, keeping your devices updated and free of malware and viruses that spread through networks is like covering your mouth when you cough in public. Doing your part can help reduce the headaches and economic impacts of cybercrime and malicious software in your neighborhood, as well as the farthest corners of the planet. And don't think you're less susceptible when using a Mac. Mac can also get viruses too. So the other tip that I have, so MFA. MFA has been a very popular topic, especially recently. So what this is, it's multi-factor authentication, and they reduce the risk of security breaches from occurring and keeps data safe. It protects against attacks that we talked about earlier, such as social engineering, phishing, password attacks, and others. In the past, requiring a static username and password to access the account seems sufficient for security. However, weak or stolen passwords can be used to execute fraud attacks and data breaches when they are the only form of authentication required. So using MFA to bolster password security with another form of authentication is proven to keep attackers out of your system. And according to Microsoft, MFA can prevent 99.9% of attacks on your accounts. So authentication factors are something you know, so knowledge about a thing. The most common knowledge factor is a password. Other knowledge factors include pins, passphrases, and security questions. So like, what was the name of your high school? But these are going away. The next is something you have. So possessing something. Possession factors include smartphones, hard tokens, soft tokens, key fobs, and smart cards. To verify a user's identity, they may receive a one-time password, so OTP, sent to a smartphone, receive a unique code generated by a physical token, or they may need to insert a smart card into a device. And then the last one is something you are, so inheritance. Inheritance factors, also referred to as biometrics, are the unique physical traits we all possess. Biometrics are verified through fingerprint scans, voice or facial recognition, retinal scans, or other methods such as your heartbeat is one of them. Because biometrics require some sort of hardware for scanning, enterprises need to make sure that users have the access to the necessary equipment before implementation. So something you know and have are the most common ones that we are using and deploying more of. How you can help is support when you have initiatives like this come up. If at home, if you have any accounts like banks or other that have sensitive information, use MFA. Banks require it, and other apps and websites may have it as optional, but when in doubt, just go ahead and make sure you turn that on, just so you can keep your account just a little safer. And so I've talked about MFAs, kind of implementing that with passwords, but passwords, it's also good to make sure that those are secure as well. So strong passwords protect your electronic accounts and devices from unauthorized access, keeping your sensitive personal information safe. The more complex the password is, the more protected your information will be from cyber threats and hackers. So how can you make sure that passwords don't jeopardize your security? You can see right here on the slide that here are some tips on creating a secure password to help safeguard your information. So one that I just mentioned, use two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication as an additional security measure. So this requires you to provide more information than your password alone. So this can be assigned, as I mentioned before, with a PIN, a code sent to your email or mobile phone, or a fingerprint or voice print. Though not available across all accounts, you should implement this whenever possible to further protect your information. And incorporate numbers, symbols, and uppercase letters and lowercase letters into your password. Hackers use programs that cycle through the most common, simplest passwords used. Because of this, passwords should include a combination of letters, numbers, and symbols to increase its complexity. The more complex it is, the safer it is. And then make sure your password is at least 15 characters in length. Sometimes hackers use a brute force method to gain access into your accounts and devices. However, the longer your password is, the less likely it is for a cyber threat to occur. Complex, lengthy passwords take too much time to hack, so cyber terrorists are less likely to target these. And then the last one, also my favorite tip, use an abbreviated phrase or saying for your password. So choosing a password that's easy to remember makes sense and often can be done safely. So pick a phrase that's memorable to you and then create a secure password around it. So for instance, as we see right next to the bullet points, so I buy 2 mangoes at the market every week can be shortened to what you see at the bottom right there. And then tips for phishing. So as we saw in the phishing email at the very beginning, check the from email address. That is always a good red flag to just look at right off the bat. So spelling on the from email can be mildly different or completely different depending on how much time the attacker wants to take on the phishing email. As we saw earlier, that was not a legitimate email whatsoever. But also keep in mind that email addresses can be spoofed, so they can be a little trickier to spot. So spoof, as you all know, is the imitation of something. So just like phone calls, emails can be spoofed as well, and so can websites. Another point to look at is grammar and spelling. So just a word of caution. hackers are using AI to help them write emails. So grammar and spelling errors are becoming less common. However, it is still a red flag to just keep in mind when spotting other red flags in the emails. Sometimes if they don't want to put too much effort in it, there will be a couple spelling errors that are a little easier to spot, and then you can go ahead and report it. And also, think before you click. So if something looks suspicious, whether it's an email or a website, use caution before opening or clicking. On most browsers, you can see a target URL by hovering over the link. Do this to check before you click any of them. So threat actors, a person, group, or entity performing a cyber attack designed to impact an organization negatively, can exploit this to trick you into downloading a malicious payload or take you to a fake website to have you enter in your username and password. So like a credential harvester, like I mentioned earlier. And then the other bullet point, so watch out for spoofing. Like I mentioned, spoofing can happen with URLs, so similar URLs, so the difference between Microsoft and Macrosoft. Same thing with emails, same thing with phone numbers. So if you receive a phone call that looks like it may have been spoofed, just don't answer it. And then same with emails, do not interact with emails that looks like it may be a phishing attempt. And then the next bullet point, sense of urgency and fear that Bram mentioned earlier. So setting a tight deadline within the next few hours or minutes invokes a fear response, which makes the user want to hurry and click on a link, download an attachment, or call a phone number. For example, like USPS even, they won't send an email giving you a 24-hour deadline. So always just kind of look at the context of the email that you're receiving and see if it makes sense for there to even be a deadline in the first place. And if you're not sure, it's best to go to the individual or the entity directly. So for example, if you receive something from USPS, just go to the USPS website, or you can go ahead and contact them just to make sure if they actually did mean to send it. And same thing with vendors too. And phishing emails can have malicious attachments that are infected with viruses and other malware. And good practice is to never download attachments, especially if you don't know the sender. So if you see red flags that fall into any or all of these, do not respond to them. Make sure you report it, especially if they request personal or sensitive information. If you're not expecting it, do not respond. So kind of putting all of those red flags for phishing emails together, here is an example of an email that was spoofed from our help desk. So you can see up here that the email sender is not legitimate. You can see here with the 3 with the help desk, and then tepp.com is not a legitimate TEP email address. And then going down the line, so subject, it just said important update. Didn't really let the user know what kind of update there was. So there's a sense of urgency and a sense of curiosity, making the user want to click in the email. You can see here that the email was sent to undisclosed recipients. So make sure to watch out for that, especially if the email was BCC'd to you when there is no reason for it to be BCC'd. And then do not download suspicious email attachments, especially where the names don't make sense and if you don't know the sender, especially if you're not expecting it. And we have an external email tag. So if you have that at your company, just use that to your advantage. Just if it's coming from an external source, especially one that you do not know, don't click on it. And here, the email actually did have one little typo. So instead of enhanced, there was an X here. And then watch out for lack of generic greetings and signatures. So especially with them BCCing you, we've noticed this a lot with vendor compromises, where the vendor hacks into like someone's account that we work with, and they kind of get a list of everyone that they've worked with, and they like to do this thing that we like to call pray and spray. So they BCC a ton of users, and they BCC them so you can't tell how many other emails were sent just by looking at the email itself. And they don't put in a greeting, or they just say hello, just so they can keep it broad enough to where it still applies to them, because when you include a name in the greeting, you can only really potentially hit one person. And then signatures, especially if it's coming from a vendor, you can kind of tell if a signature has been messed with. So always just pay attention to that. And then be suspicious of links. Verify where you're going. So you can do this by hovering over the link. And with this link, we were able to confirm that this was a spoofed Microsoft link. So always hover before you click on anything. And then do not reply to suspicious emails. Always report it when in doubt. So talking about vendors. So examples of questions to ask your vendors when onboarding them for a project, just to make sure your projects are cyber secure. So how is your data protected? Vendors should be able to explain if their data is encrypted, if they provide transport layer security, so TLS, and what their data security protocol looks like. Sometimes a company knows what they're doing is if they mention a cybersecurity framework, if they have endpoint security and firewall implementation, and if they have dedicated security personnel or cybersecurity personnel. And then how and where is your data stored? So next, you can ask potential vendors how and where their data is stored. You can assess a vendor's overall reliability by asking a vendor how and where their data is. For example, companies only store their data on-site are at risk of server outages. Companies with solely off-site data are at higher risk for security breaches, especially if they don't have the proper security infrastructure. And vendors who store data on and off-site are a much better bet, because of course you don't want to work with a vendor who is at high risk of getting hacked, because they might target you and send you phishing emails if they do get hacked, and it does impede business services. And then the next question, what is your backup procedure? So this question is a sneak peek at their preparedness in case of outages. It also helps you evaluate if your data will always be available. The vendor should keep their physical and cloud storages separate, as this ensures critical data remains intact if their hardware somehow gets corrupted. Having a physical backup, on the other hand, can help restore their system as soon as possible in case of incidents like ransomware. And the next question, so what are your incident, business, and disaster recovery plans? So disaster recovery, business continuity, and incident response plans are all different programs your vendor should have. A cybersecurity preparedness vendor will, or a cybersecurity prepared vendor will be able to explain each plan to you in detail, and their answers are vital for assessing their preparedness. They should also mention implementing routine disaster recovery tests. If they have the foresight to run these plans before security incidents happen, then your data is probably in the hands of good company. And then what security measures does the vendor currently have in place? Ask the vendor to outline exactly what processes and policies it has in place to defend against cyber threats. Which tools and technologies does the vendor use to monitor its environment for threats? Has it outsourced security operations to another service provider, or does the vendor handle its security fully in-house? So understanding the contractual language about security breach notifications and security gaps discoveries is also a very important point when kind of onboarding a new vendor. So all of those tips in place. So something to keep aware of, and something that we at TEP, we make sure to remember, is we operate on keeping a when, not if mindset is critical to staying alert and aware to potential cyber attacks. The potential for cyber events is real regardless of the size of your organization, and the worst thing you can do for your organization is ignore the risk. So you can implement incident response exercises, tabletop exercises, just little exercises, just pretending, what would you do if you were to get hit by X attack? And it's also a good idea to include other departments in incident response exercises that would be affected if they were hit in a ransomware attack, for example. So always keeping just when it happens, not if it happens, is very, very crucial, and I cannot stress this enough. And that about sums up my presentation. Does anyone have any questions? I think we have about 5 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. I will have the questions panel open here for just a minute. If anyone does have any specific questions for Jocelyn, you can drop those in the questions drop down on GoToWebinar now. To address some things that we'd seen earlier, as far as PDHs go, yes, this qualifies for both wastewater PDHs and drinking water PDHs. Operators in attendance, remember that handouts drop down here on GoToWebinar. You'll want to make sure you download the one that is the agenda. It says Agenda, Cybersecurity, and Emergency Preparedness. That is the PDF that you will upload to your certification portal to obtain the PDHs from the webinar today. We do have a question here for you, Jocelyn. The question is, what point is there a referral to a police agency? Oh, at what point should there be a referral to a police agency?
So when there's an incident on our end, a cybersecurity incident, we don't contact law enforcement until we notice that there has been an intrusion inside the company. And when it starts, we start seeing like odd network traffic, computers are starting to shut down. So when we confirm that there actually has been an incident, within our company, that's when we get the contact, not of law enforcement or the police, but we usually, like in that case, it's a better idea to go ahead and contact the FBI.
Excellent, thank you. And a couple more questions. First, are there any risks for having biometrics as your sole protection to private information?
So there's not risks of having biometrics as your sole protection. However, there are better ways to, and I'm assuming like biometrics as like a multi-factor authentication. If not, it is better to have two rather than one. But having like a hard token, having like a one-time password sent to you is, I would say, is a little more secure, because biometrics aren't like the most foolproof way. However, it is still a secure method, especially if you're using it as a multi-factor authentication.
Perfect, thank you. And two more, it looks like. First is, are authentication apps reliable?
Yes, they are reliable, especially if you're using a legitimate one. So like Microsoft Authenticator is reliable. And of course, it's not so much reliable anymore if someone does get your phone. If someone gets your phone, go ahead, especially if it's like a work phone, contact your IT department so they can go ahead, just shut it off completely so no one can access it. But if you have your phone with you, just make sure you don't lose it. It is like a legit way to, in a secure way, to go ahead and have that extra layer of authenticating when you log into your account.
Fantastic. And final question, are Apple iPhones vulnerable to security attacks?
Yes, they are. So I know with Mac and iPhones and everything, like within like the Apple sphere, they are better about patching vulnerabilities and just minimizing the security attacks, but that does not make them foolproof. So just make sure, just don't visit any sketchy websites. If you're working with a vendor, or if you go to websites pretty frequently, just in case it gets spoofed, it is better practice to bookmark those sites just to avoid going to the spoofed version. And don't long press on any links, because even though Apple, they say that you're previewing the link, what they're actually doing is opening the link on the back end on Safari. And if the link is malicious, there is potential for malware to be downloaded to your device. So it is less common to get malware downloaded onto your device because Apple does such a great job, but it's not 100%.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for all the information and the presentation. Much appreciated. I'm now going to pass things on to Michael. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Michael, did you need screen sharing right away here?
First off, I just want to make sure you can hear me, Bram?
Yes, you are coming through.
Great, okay. I will not need to screen share. The next presenter will be sharing their screen here momentarily.
Perfect, that will work.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and thank you for the opportunity to present this three-part discussion entitled Planning for and Responding to Cyber Attacks, Actionable Steps for Water Systems. And so this three-part discussion is intended to walk us chronologically through your cyber path and to give actionable steps that you as a water utility and as operators can take to improve your cyber resilience. So we're going to start with a discussion on cybersecurity assessment. Then we're going to get into post-cyber attack response for water systems. And then we'll get into incident command system cyber responses, which will focus on applying the incident command system ICS principles to a cyber attack. So for the first discussion, cybersecurity assessments, I want to introduce Anthony Jackas, who is a product manager for networks and cybersecurity with Border States. He's been in this role for 25 plus years, working on IT and OT cybersecurity and network infrastructure. He specializes in networks and cybersecurity. He focuses on strategic OT network infrastructure products and solution implementation, cybersecurity assessments, automation control software, cybersecurity posture surveys, and aligning clients with the NIST cybersecurity framework for network and cybersecurity compliance, while delivering the best-in-class industrial technologies and partnering with various partners to help water utilities reach their desired outcome. So at this time, Anthony, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we look forward to hearing about cybersecurity assessments.
I am going to send screen control over to you, Anthony. You and Michael are both in here as Michael, so if I send it to the wrong one at first, just let me know and I will send it to the other. Perfect, Anthony. We see currently it looks like your Outlook screen here. You should be able to change which display is being shown under the sharing dropdown on GoToWebinar. There should be a big pause button, and under that you can select with the dropdown the monitor that you wish to present on. And you should also be able to unmute yourself here on GoToWebinar on the top left.
Okay, sorry about this. I'm not sharing the screen like.
You're currently sharing the Outlook. You can either drag your presentation over to the other screen, or you should be able to change the screen on GoToWebinar.
Are you able to see this?
Yes, I can see PowerPoint. If you want to try that from beginning or from current slide option, we'll see if it presents.
I got my screen on the right side. It ain't coming out on the left side where I'd like it.
Okay, then you can, if you have the GoToWebinar panel, at the very top of that, there's a tab that says sharing. Click that sharing tab and there should be a big pause button. And right below that big pause button should be another drop down that you can click on and select a different monitor on there. And there is Outlook email. Maybe try hitting present again on the PowerPoint now.
I apologize for this.
No worries. If you click present on your PowerPoint, are you able to see it on any of your screens, the presentation?
Yes, I'm seeing it on my right screen, but not on my left, where I got it, where I'd like it to show. All I got to do is move the screen over to the right.
Bram and Anthony, if it would be helpful, I can present the slides from my screen and you can tell me when to advance if that's helpful.
Okay, let's do that, okay?
Okay.
That would be great. Thank you, Michael. I'll pass that to you then.
All right, how is that? Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm operating on one screen, so I'm not sure if you see the GoToWebinar controls on the right side. If you do, I apologize.
Nope, it looks great. Just the presentation.
Okay, great. Anthony, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Hawkes. I'd like to apologize for the delay on this presentation, but today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity assessment for water and wastewater, proactive planning for a resilient, secure, and sustainable future. Next slide, please. The agenda today will go through the introduction, overview of cybersecurity threat landscape, all the way through critical areas of focus and assessment. So with that, let's move over to our first slide. Next slide. So, introduction. Cybersecurity for critical infrastructure is essential to protect the systems that society depends on for everyday functioning. So, attention to all IT and OT managers, frontline workers, stakeholders, executive leaders, distinguished directors, and all OT critical infrastructure personnel. You are responsible for much, and that is to provide, protect, and to help and to keep safe the people of your communities, municipalities, cities, and towns. We want to acknowledge and to thank you for doing a great job. But now with the influx of the ever-growing threat of cyber attacks, including the water and wastewater utilities, now's the time to review your playbook. To be proactive also means for you to have a plan in place, a playbook that is. Here's a question: when was it last updated? That is your playbook. When was it last tested, or your plan? For those who don't have a plan, well, perhaps it's time to start creating one. And for those who do have that plan, kudos to you. Some may remember the old adage, if you fail to plan, then plan to fail. And I live by this because it's so true. So to be resilient, we must be proactive. When an attack happens, and it will, if it hasn't already and you've experienced it, what are you going to do? Who are you going to call? There are two categories, being proactive or being reactive. In the life, there is nothing worse than not being prepared or having a plan. Cyber attacks are on the rise. They will wreak havoc. A disaster, let's consider the IT/OT department. They would not operate without a DRP, a disaster recovery plan. A business wouldn't operate without a BCP or a business continuity plan. And a larger enterprise wouldn't operate without a COOP, a continuity of operations plan. The operation or the SOP procedure, the IAP incident action plan, and the IRP insight response plan. Next slide. The overview of cybersecurity landscape threats. The cyber threat landscape is constantly evolving, driven by various factors such as technological advancements, geopolitical tensions, and the increasing sophistication of cyber attacks. Here are some key aspects of the current threat landscape. Now, advanced persistent threats, that's APTs, they are a prolonged and targeted cyber attack in which an intruder gains access to a network and remains undetected for an extended period of time. Ransomware, we know what that is, but this type of malware encrypts a victim's files, and the attacker demands a ransom to restore access. Ransom attacks have also been more frequent and sophisticated. Together with AI, they're becoming extremely dangerous to our environments. Supply chain attacks. Criminal targets less secure elements in the supply chain to gain access to larger networks. These attacks can be widespread, impact as seen in the SolarWinds attack several years back. How many of you remember that one? I personally was involved in that, and the medical facility that I at that time worked was impacted severely. So the list goes on. Remote work challenges. For those of you who have to offer secure access for remote workers, the shift to remote work has expanded the attack surface for many organizations. Unsecured home networks and personal devices have become very new entry points of vulnerabilities. Next slide. Cybercrime pays, and it's only getting worse. That is correct. Quickly, in the past 3 years, 61% of those attacks have been on industrial infrastructures. By 2025, expect to pay over $10 trillion estimated cost of cybercrime annually. Cybercrime has led to unauthorized access, data manipulation, or even the shutdown of critical environmental systems. This has resulted in an inaccurate environmental data, hindered pollution control, and even caused environmental disasters in our power grid systems and within our wastewater treatment plants. Industrial OT companies are prime targets of cybercrime. Why? Because contributing factors such as unpatched legacy systems, and I understand it. Good solid equipment lasts forever. But here's a vulnerability, which can be more than 30 years old, and with old vulnerabilities and limited security controls. So be proactive to avoid a catastrophic, unplanned cyber attack. How? Let's move on to our next slide. A cybersecurity assessment. Here's the methodology. We talked about the playbook earlier, and this is talking about preparing a cybersecurity plan, a disaster recovery plan. I know you've got one in place. Some may not have one in place, but this is how we go about it. What is the cybersecurity assessment methodology? It's taken from NIST, but the process is identifying, evaluating, and addressing potential threats in an organization's technical infrastructure. There are 4 steps. 1, prepare for the assessment. 2, conduct an assessment. 3, communicate the results. And 4, maintain the assessment. What it means now is to take action on those actionable items. Next slide. Earlier we talked about NIST. Well, what is NIST? The National Institute of Standards and Technology developed its cybersecurity framework to strengthen the security of the United States critical infrastructure. Like most security frameworks, NIST can be applied to any sized organization in any industry unilaterally. The NIST framework includes 5 cores. Off to the right, we have identify. Identify, which means the governance, the team that makes this happen, all the paperwork, the legwork. But it doesn't include them. It includes the rest of the team within that unit. Protect. Those are the administrative and technical controls, supported by and handled by the IT team. Detect. That's detection of internal and external threats. From what? These are from anomalous threats, vulnerability detection, and continuous monitoring. Now, with this said, we go to response. That is the ability to respond to a detected threat. And this is governed by having some kind of a plan as to how to proceed to get to that next stage. Now, once the attack has happened, we're talking about cybersecurity in this instance, but it could be anything: fire, flood, across the board. Many things happen, snowstorms. But to recover business continuity and disaster, we need to have the data backups, disaster recovery plan, and even exercise these throughout the year. Maybe once every 6 months, once a year, have a tabletop exercise. Next slide. So the OT Cybersecurity Assessment Services Framework. It's nice because the framework has, from NIST, has provided for us the structure, again, the framework of a reliable NIST-based approach for a 360-degree protection. So that's 360 protection. Who doesn't like that? We got the front door, the back door covered. That's important. Next slide. Once again, we're identifying the risks to our OT networks, the systems, the applications, the data, the services, everything within our domain, whether it's the IT domain, the OT domain, we're responsible for it. But using sophisticated assessment tools, processes, and assessment helps critical clients learn where security vulnerabilities exist and to establish priorities, create a comprehensive plan or plans or your playbook for cybersecurity implementation and ongoing monitoring, critical for our continued success and resiliency. Next slide. I thought this was pretty cool. The proactive plan creation. Here it is, your playbook. On the right, we've got identify, and it breaks it down as to what it is. Second, protect, IT governance, data privacy and policy. Detect, once again, response. To the right, we've got the details. Recover, Hopefully none of us ever get to that stage where we have to recover after a disaster. But the reality is, by having this playbook in place, that plan, that'll help us recover much quickly because we have a plan. So proactive planning for a resilient, secure, and sustainable future. For those of you, us, in the water and wastewater environment. Next slide. Once again, compliance frameworks include, we've got NIST, the CFS, we've got NIST SP 800-802 and the 882. We've also got the NIST IEC 64443 and NIST for the cybersecurity framework, that's the CFS. This framework provides a policy framework of computer security guidance for how private sector organizations can use and improve their ability to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber attacks. And we're loaded with information, but the point is we've got a place to go. We have resources. Next slide. A case study and industry best practices. We're talking about Oldsmar, Florida, water treatment plant attack in 2021. There are many companies that provide secure solutions for water and wastewater, that sector and beyond, including all industrial floor space. For example, some of the leaders include Rockwell Automation. We've got Fortinet, we've got Clarity, Dragos, Cisco, and of course, these are just a few of the names, but the list goes on with solutions on how to be able to implement these strategic solutions for protection. The end result is that we gain a robust operation. We know that we can never prevent an attack that is, but when it does happen, we'll be ready. Next slide. This is important. The outcomes delivered by OT cybersecurity are hugely beneficial, but building a cyber resilient utility is big. Actionable steps and then the post-assessment steps. Remember, as MedSped in training, awareness and monitoring is critical. Next slide. These are some areas. I'm just going to highlight the critical areas of focus in the assessment. What it does is it improves your network mapping, where your devices are, your assets, you've got inventory. It also includes the risk and the vulnerability identification, network and SCADA system security. Here we have antivirus system, patch management for all of your OT devices. Again, access control, admin privileges, web filtering, email filtering. Yes, for the IT floor specifically. We already have this on the IT side. We're talking the OT side now. Companies, as I mentioned earlier, have these solutions. Next slide, please. So, OT cybersecurity assessment overview. We've learned what it is, who performs it. That would be the cybersecurity experts that can come to identify your location, vulnerabilities, potential security threats, and systems and networks. We explained how it's done. When should an OT cybersecurity assessment occur? Well, when there's significant changes to the OT. Perhaps you're growing, you want to plan an upgrade. This is the best time to conduct one. What about no existing security posture baseline? Establishes a baseline for security posture and maintain risk profiles with regular assessments. We need to have these preventative measures to mitigate any potential threats that may impact our operation. And again, let's look at the last one, regulatory compliance. I encourage everyone to advance forward and to update your DR plans, your playbook, and to run tests on them. For those who don't have a disaster recovery plan, please consider working with one. Make it your utmost effort to get a team together and create one. It is going to save us when that time comes. Next slide. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you for the presentation. Michael, I'll pass it back to you then. If you are able to unmute Michael, go for it. If not, I can pass the screen control to Jacques and we can continue on with post-cyber attack responses for water systems.
Yep, this is Jacques, and just a moment for me to share my screen.
We see it here. It looks good.
Okay, thank you much. Hello all, Jacques Brados. Very nice to meet you. We're going to talk about, oh no, it happened. What are we going to do? And hopefully there's a little bit for everybody in the slide deck here. I am me. Here's the best way to get a hold of me. I'm currently on the volunteering side. I am a member of National InfraGard. I'm your local Arizona water wastewater sector chief. There's another email address to get a hold of me. Some great resources that InfraGard can get for you over here on the utility side, along with a lot of other great organizations. Been with Direct Defense for 3 years, doing cybersecurity assessments for critical infrastructure, primarily on the OT SCADA side, but certainly enough on the IT side. Black & Veatch, I designed things for water, and then really where I fell in love. I was the city of Glendale, Arizona SCADA manager for 9 years, in which we was there for the first year of the Super Bowl, and Department of Homeland Security audited me, and that made me really changed my life. Procter & Gamble Manufacturing, Instrumentation and Controls manager, and I'm an 8-year Navy nuclear electrician. Anybody that's been in the military, thank you much for your service. I appreciate it. I've got some certifications. I'm old and gray. I've been around for a long time. Mostly, and for my Arizona friends, I did graduate here from Scottsdale's Saguaro High School, so go Silvercats. All right, let's walk through about it. Oh crap, it happened, right? So I want to talk about let's do a little mini tabletop exercise. We're going to talk about how to do it wrong, then we're going to turn around how to do it right. We're going to talk a little bit on the wrong way would be to go figure it out. We're going to talk about that on the IT network, focus primarily for water. It spreads over to the OT network. We'll talk about inside the fence, outside the fence, and then we'll talk about the right way it was structured and lessons learned from the field. Ask me how I know. So on the IT side, it's Monday morning, city users or utility users show up. They can't log in. When they do, they get a sign saying, give us Bitcoin. This is a very typical WannaCry malware that circa 2017. It's not a picture I have to give credit to Wikipedia, of course, right? So what happens? Everybody's going to call the IT department, everybody, finance director, police, fire, utilities director, library, parks, rec, civil cannabis, city council members, sorry. I'll scream and fix it now. I do want to tell a little story that was fun while I was there at the city of Glendale. In a tabletop, this wasn't a real world scenario, but it was pretty much a whole city thing. Talking about who's going to get priority to fix these things. And it's all fictitious, but the water director and the fire chief are looking at each other. We're going to bring up the fire stuff first so that we can see where all the fires are. And the water director is like, no, we're going to bring up the water stuff so that we can make sure that there's water for the fire hydrants. And they went at it for a little while. Then finally the water director told the fire chief, look, Without water, you're just a bunch of nurses with pretty trucks. We're bringing up the water side first. So that's one of those times where it was really funny, but you can't laugh. And ultimately, the city manager makes the decision. And we'll talk more about that later. So what's the additional response? An old Navy military thing: when in danger, fear, or doubt, run in circles and scream and shout. If you're unprepared, you all jump in and try to do what you think is best, and I give that. So the IT team announces, power off everything, don't turn anything on. We're planning on wiping and restoring everything that's out there. This was a bad decision. The person that made this decision just implicated themselves, as they are the person demanding the ransom to get paid. The other problem is there's very limited ways to know how the malevolent actors got in, and because you just destroyed all the evidence. So it's hard to know if you've actually got them out and can stop them from coming back in. So let's talk about impacts inside the water department specifically, more on the kind of the support side. Finance, they can't run payroll, they can't pay bills, they can't accept payments, and we know how finance managers get when they can't get money. On the water quality, think about you're taking those hand grab samples. Did they have access to their database? Are the true water samplers, the little magic machines, some of them have computers. Are those computers connected to the IT network? If they are, they likely have that same ransom screen, or if they're really, really old, they've just flat out faulted with some weird message. If they're not on there, and they're true standalone bench little boxes, then they're probably not impacted. But where are you going to keep that data, because you can't get to the database? The work order systems, your computerized maintenance management systems, those are likely not going to work. Video security systems, in my history, are kind of hit and miss. Sometimes those video cameras are gone, sometimes you can see them. The desk phone systems are all getting more and more voice over IP or computerized. Your desk phones may or may not work. The email on your cell phones, that probably does work. Depends on some of the different kinds of malwares, if they reach all the way out to your Active Directory domain controllers up there in the cloud. And then the access card reader. So think about these card swipes. I've always seen those work when people have been having bad days. You can't add an employee, you can't delete an employee, you can't see who went through the door, but you swipe your card, the door should unlock for you. But really, as you're thinking about all of these computers going away, start thinking about how are you going to do your daily work? And thus the picture of a book with a paper and pencil, because that's pretty much where you're going to go back to where you're going back to. Let's get over onto the OT side. Let's talk about inside the fence or at the water treatment plants. I'm going to start off with say the SCADA system is fine until it's not fine. And so in our little simulation here, I'll say that the programmable logic controllers, they work fine. There are a couple of scenarios in history where they have gotten down to the logic controllers and turned them and faulted them, and honestly have turned them into bricks, aka they were not able to recover them. You needed new hardware, but so like 2 and 20 years, but it is becoming more often. But you cannot see the SCADA screens in that central control room there. You're going to have that same kind of logo. Hope you getting a little giggle out of my bad editing there. Plant operator walks over to the filter room. The SCADA screen, if there's a dedicated SCADA computer in there, it's going to have that same give me Bitcoin screen. But the touch panels, they look normal. The numbers are updating. Are you going to touch anything? So inside the SCADA fence, a few hours have gone by. The SCADA support team says, we think it's going to take us 3 days to recover that. And they're probably going to say the 1 day initially, and then it'll likely turn into 3 days, and then let's kind of plan on 7 days. So you start thinking about this inside of the plan. All right, even if they say 3 days, 7 days, I can't see anything centrally. Think about all the different buildings, all the different places, your filter galleries, your chemical building, your chemical feed, your raw water coming in. What stations need to be located? Locations need to be staffed 24/7. What stations can I just walk by? And if you're walking by every 4 hours, do I need to walk by every hour, every 2 hours? That a picture of an operator standing in front of what I would call an operator interface terminal, OIT, that panel mounted display. Can you backwash with those? Are grab samples needed? Remember, your SCADA system is gone, the historian is gone, the trending will not be collected. Where do I need to grab these samples at? How often do I need to grab them? And then where do I record those results? Oh yeah, that pad of paper again. And then what if the PLCs did not work? Could you open up the valves manually? Could you push the start and stop buttons for the motors manually? Know how long to run them if you only have the local sensors to see them. Are there printed procedures? The thought of, hey, I'm going to go if we have a bad day, we're going to go to the computer and print them out. Yeah, the computers are not there. Are they where they need to be them? And then have you ever practiced this? And want to kind of reiterate, this probably the third time you've said it, of make somebody backwash a filter locally every once in a while. All right, let's move outside the SCADA fence, right? So outside the fence, we're out in the field, so we're thinking about reservoirs, towers, pump stations, both on the water, on the wastewater side, force mains for my wastewater friends. I'll assume that the sewage lift stations are going to operate normally. They may or may not have Ethernet going to them. There's typically not SCADA at the lift station. Again, I said I'll be nice and let the PLCs work. But the potable water pump stations will most likely retain their last operating set point. So they'll be in level control for a reservoir or pressure control for a pressure zone. They'll maintain that last pressure and keep going, but realize that remotely those reservoir levels cannot be seen. If you go down to that pump station, could you see the reservoir level on the little panel computer that I've seen that I'm putting there that's usually directly connected to a PLC or some kind of digital readout there? Again, trending can't be recovered. Is sampling needed out there in the field? Typically for operating, no, but for water quality, the true water quality lab, they may need samples out there. How often do these sites need to be visited? If you're visiting them once a week, should that be more often? If you're visiting them daily, should that be more often? Is this written down somewhere? Where it always goes sideways, communications and structure. The plant phone number is on the front gate, most likely. The rover cell phone number is likely at each water pump site. That phone's going to start ringing. The field superintendent's going to say, keep the same tour schedule. Then the water director calls that phone number and says, tour twice as often. The local news is calling and asking, is the water safe? Do you, as the person that's going to be receiving that phone call, know what to say for each of these questions? The myriad of other questions that are going to come as the hours and the days go by. So let's talk about doing it the right way. The thought of just go figure it out, or I have seen a single line continuity of operations plan that basically says, go ask your supervisor. No, don't do that. Create a plan, practice the plan, and update that plan after the practices, right? So let's, the blue text at the top of the screen says, we're gonna do this the right way. NIST special publication 800-61 is specifically for incident response plans. And you already heard enough about the CSF, which is probably a good thing for me to say about right here of, I don't want to repeat myself. So Alex, if you're on, I am going to probably finish early so that you can start and then we can get to lunch a little bit earlier. So let's talk about these different plans that are out there, which my predecessor, the previous presenter covered pretty good. The continuity of operations plan. This is a whole organization. This is, and again, this is a book, a physical book that should exist. And this is how do we operate manually for a lot of different conditions, right? So for us in Arizona, we could get those little microbursts that you lose power, significant rainstorms, all of those threats that could come in, and how are we going to continue to operate, both at the plant level, out in the field level, and for the entire department level, as far as loss of electricity and running on generators, and what's going to work and what's not going to work, and how do we do that? The water quality lab, the finance, the entire organization should have a section within the continuity of operations plan, and then how the paper, how do you operate manually, should exist in this book. The incident response plan is an IT/OT document. This is the definition of an incident, an event, an incident, and a breach. These, I'm going to be repetitive here, but these have legal terms inside of them, and they have definitions, and this book should talk about, this is the definition of an event, an incident, and a breach. Actually, I'm going to go into more detail in the next slides. The run books are here for the different things, where maybe it's just website defacement, maybe it's just a single area that got hit by lightning, and so then you're out of that part of the plant's not running, but the rest of it's fine. And then the definitions of how do we find the malevolent person, how do we keep them out of there. That incident now from that incident response plan, you come to an incident recovery plan. This is typically a separate book, right? So now that we've got everybody out and cleaned out, then how do we get back up again? This is a different plan. This is where it's written down because we decided on a Tuesday afternoon on a who's more important between the water director and the fire chief. And then the disaster recovery plan is an IT/OT document about how to restore and how do we test. And we'll talk about more of that in a moment. So back to that incident response plan. Here are the sections. These are pieces of NIST 800-61 incident management. So again, you're triaging it. Just because you got a phone call that says something went bad, my example is pretty blatant when it's on all the computers, but a lot of them are a lot more vague than that. I do have a video of a treatment plant where somebody got in remotely and they just started shutting pumps down. How do you validate that? How do you categorize these different incidents or these events and turn them into incidents? How do you prioritize if you have multiple things happening at the same time? Definitions of escalation. If it happens this, we're troubleshooting it for a couple of hours and we don't get any progress. There are written escalation criteria. Very, very typical in water, wastewater, and for even me personally. I got it, I can fix it, and I'm just going to keep going, and then 2 hours, and then 4 hours, and 6 hours goes by. Having those definitions of when escalation is an important concept to have, and then who to escalate to, and then who do they escalate it to beyond that after their time limits or area of impact. Into that analysis, there are documented methods for analysis of what is this malware, how did they get in, how are we going to handle this, and then you're going to see this a couple times, but document what was performed. If you think about the plant operator and you're now a couple of hours in and we haven't figured it out, get somebody in there dedicated. They don't have to know how to spell IT or OT, but they need to be able to write down everything that's coming in at time, and then what happened so that we can do, one, know where we're at, and then two, know how to address this later. And then determine that magnitude. And again, this is a page inside of a book, that talks about area of impact, how many operators or how many areas, several different discussions about magnitude, and there should be a piece of paper that helps you determine that. The internal reporting, internal and external notifications. Well, we talked about escalation criteria above, exactly who internally and who and how externally gets notified, and then that information that is expected to be shared. So you're starting to see where, as an operator, this is the information you should be collecting and you should be sharing it. If you're doing tours every 4 hours, are you calling every 4 hours? Are you calling at the end of your shift to give people an update of what's going on? if it's hourly, what are the, wait, no, this is the addresses I went to, these are the ones I didn't go to, this is what the values were. I think you kind of get the point of it. And then finally, reporting, you know, how do we contain this? There are IT and OT methods to prove that it's contained, or that, you know, how to contain things. Again, powering down is bad in general, but then mitigated, how to prove that we've got them out, right? So we're confident the malevolent actors are out, we know how they got in, and we know that they can't get in again. This is really the point of incident response, right? Get us into a safe spot. Now we start into recovery. And that incident recovery plan, again, this is a pre-written recovery order, fire, water, police, finance, etc. Which order are we going to recover these things, and what are their minimum viable products that they have to get in, right? So in the water, is the plants the higher priority, or outside the fence the higher priority, or some of those larger pump stations? Test the restoration of the backups inside of a sandbox. Don't bring back to production, but that also means you internal departments need to confirm that this restoration is accurate. So don't just take IT's word or the SCADA support team's word. Yeah, we're back up. Here it is. Go have fun. No, the IT department, you end users, accounting, finance, water quality, security for the video cameras, make sure that that restoration is accurate. IT should be telling you, we pulled this back up from a certain day, whether that was yesterday, 2 days ago, Sunday, whatever. Once you as the end departments decide, yes, we're happy with it, yes, we realize we've lost some data, 2 days of data if we had to go back to last Sunday, that is the decision to declare the end of the incident. Now we're starting to come back into production. We're probably 80% up. Now we start talking about these recovery communications, right? Those documented methods for testing success. So used departments should have pre-written things of, this is how you create a work order, this is how you close a work order. All of that's tested and working, and there should be pre-written test plans for that. And then again, documented what was performed. All of those documentations get rolled up into this, final thing. Lessons learned, and update those documents. It's not going to go well. There will be some flailing about, and every time, there's a great old quote of, plans are great until you get hit, and then you throw the plan away. But as a guy that was in the nuclear Navy during Desert Storm, bad things happen, you learn, and the second time the bad thing happens, you do a little bit better at it. So I wanted to reemphasize some lessons learned. We are about 2 slides away from the end of my presentation. So again, do not wipe and restore immediately. Erasing or factory resetting for my OT friends, this destroys evidence. The person that makes this decision does incriminate themselves, and the FBI, if you ever do call them, or CISA, will likely throw this person off of it, where they might sit back and make some recommendations, but they're now guilty until proven innocent, pretty much. But as an organization, you can decide there will be an asset that will be retained for evidence. This will most likely be a domain controller, an endpoint user. Keep that powered on, because there's a lot of malware that just sits up there in the memory and never gets written to the database. Disconnect the Ethernet cables. And my IT and OT support guys are like, well, that's a VM server, and there's eight Ethernet cords plugged into that for the different networks that it's supporting, and if I can't have that, I can't come up. Great, you're exactly right. Think about spare hardware. Think about, and a lot of people have redundant pairs, and so you'll take this one and isolate it and wipe and restore the second one, or the primary one, whichever one you choose to decide to keep. But this is not a decision that gets made lightly, and probably with help of whoever's going to prosecute, right? And so another thing for my manager friends that are in the audience, you may get presented with a question that says, how do you want to come up faster and destroy evidence and not worry about catching the bad guy, but we can use the hardware to come up faster? Or do you want to preserve evidence, take images, do chain of custody so that the police could possibly and the FBI could potentially go prosecute these guys, but this will slow down our recovery so that we can capture this evidence so that we can get some lessons learned. We can hopefully go get these bad guys. Make that decision on a Tuesday afternoon in a tabletop exercise instead of in the heat of battle. Get a log taker. I mentioned this before. Writing down as much as possible at key locations. So if this event is big enough and it is citywide impacted, they're probably going to start their emergency operations center. There'll be a log taker there, but you as a water department will probably have a little mini emergency operations center or central control room. You should have your own log taker. And that log taker, again, doesn't know how to spell IT, doesn't know how to spell OT, doesn't know how to spell water, just can speak English, can write well, and that person asks for spellings, right? So they're sitting next to who's ever in charge, which is the next presentation, and they're writing down as much as they can, scribbling like a kindergartner. Over communicate. If you get told to do something different by two different people, get those two telling people to listen to you. Hey, the director told me this, the superintendent told me that. You as an operator can probably make the best decision about what needs to be happening in the real world, but get those people to talk. Go up and down. It's okay to complain. It's okay to say I'm getting conflicting information. If you see something that's interesting, send that up your chain, right? The person to call law enforcement, somebody asked that before, that's the police chief. You as the water person, you make the recommendation, but the police chief probably already does have some written stuff down of when they're going to call the FBI and what information and the right person to call at the FBI to get them to come down. A little side joke, which I don't have on the slide, is the other one is the Department of Homeland Security, and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency is a chunk underneath them that would likely respond. The difference between these two is almost the difference between the police department and the fire department. The police department, if you want to get somebody arrested, you call the police department. If you want help because somebody broke into your house and they're having a heart attack and you're like, come save me, but they're not going to arrest anybody, that's the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Department. And so CISA is really the first call that you should make. And again, there should be, who's the right person to call that? Again, you should be talking to the police chief about if you want one or both. If you're the plant operator and they ask to say, is the water safe to drink? You should be sending that to the public relations contact. Your city probably has a different name for that, but you should have that as a phone number handy to you. So you just say, oh, call the PR department and here's their phone number. I mentioned it before, an event is different than an incident, is different than a breach. These terms do have legal meanings. If you do use the word breach, you've now started a clock in Arizona that's about 72 hours before you have to alert the state government and 30 days before you have to provide a report. If you just had an event, you can keep that all internally. An incident, it's a little bit grayer than that. So then added into that last, which is probably a good lead into my next slide presenter of when do you call the insurance company? And I'm going to let that one hang there. So let's go back to our exercise. IT's coming back up. They've decided finances first because we got to run payroll. So yay, thanks for paying me. And the issue comes back. The hacker was in the system for days before, and the compromise is in that most recent backup that they brought back up. The IT team is exhausted. They've been working for probably 3 days. It's time to call for help. But who are you going to call? You know, you said it in your head. You know you did. You know you did. More importantly, who's going to make that call? With that said, let's move on to NIMS and the ICS principles. If you do have a bad problem, there's my cell phone. Direct Defense does offer incident response for IT and the OT. I know how to spell RS Logics 5000, a lot of the stuff, and we'd be happy to help you. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pause for questions or turn it over.
There is a question here for you, Jacques. Before I pass it back to Michael, where can we find definitions for the legal meanings of event, incident, and breach?
I would reach out to your local city lawyer. Will be able to find those, but it's in Arizona revised statutes. Has it? I don't have the numbers at my fingertips. Along with the breach reporting requirements are also in Arizona revised statutes for the local level, and then federal has got it also. And I have to do some research on what the federal one is. But local lawyer and then Arizona revised statutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jacques. I am passing it back to Michael now.
Thank you very much, Bram. And Jacques, thank you so much for that very informative presentation. Really appreciate the actionable steps that water utilities can take post-cyber attack, the things that they should do and the things that they should not do. That was very nicely covered. We're now going to move to the third and final part of this presentation, planning for and responding to cyber attacks, actionable steps for water systems. This section is entitled Incident Command Systems, ICS, Cyber Responses, and we'll focus on applying the NIMS ICS principles specific to a cyber attack. So for that, I want to introduce a colleague I work with closely, Alex Dayton, who is the Emergency Management Coordinator for Public Water Agencies Group. And she serves in this capacity for more than 20 water agencies in Southern California. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Michael. I just want to thank ADEQ for having me today and for my wonderful cyber colleagues in this project. I have been an emergency manager for a long time, but I'm not someone who specializes in cyber, and the other folks on this team really helped me to shape this presentation in such a way that it was really going to be relevant to everybody today. So normally I teach this class in about 4 hours, and I'm covering the full NIMS ICS as well as a special California state version of it. And I'm going to spare you all of that today. But kind of jumping off where Jacques left us, in terms of talking about who you're going to call and when you're going to call them, who's going to make that call. There are a bunch of people who do get involved, and I know we've talked about several of those already this morning. So it really helps us to have the National Incident Management System and the Incident Management System to allow all of these different responders to be able to efficiently collaborate with us if it's our incident, with each other, to help us out. So the slide right now is just a little bit of an overview of kind of the differences between NIMS and ICS. And I know you all have these slides in the handouts. You also have my email, and you're welcome to contact me anytime if you have questions about that. So for whatever reason now, the slides are not forwarding. There we go. Okay. So because water districts are all different, and the way that agencies handle their IT and OT can be very different. The way that they serve their customers, who their customers are, can be very different. The context of who provides incident response support really, really matters when we're talking about who is coming to save the day. So even in my own association, I have special districts, I have irrigation districts, I have mutual water companies, I have wholesalers. I don't have investor-owned, I don't have city or county departments, but there are all these different types of water agencies. So that means we all handle IT and OT in different ways. So we may be relying on internal IT and OT personnel to help us recognize that we're having an incident. They may be the people who are making the calls, either to external IT and or OT service providers, They may be calling a local fusion center, and a fusion center is a combination of local law enforcement and federal for cyber and terrorism. And we're lucky enough to have one here in Los Angeles County. Jacques mentioned CISA and FBI. So depending on what types of data you collect, you may also have compliance considerations about other agencies that you may need to notify. So there are a lot of different things to consider when we're talking about who is going to come and help. Jacques also mentioned when we're calling the insurance company, when we're letting legal counsel know that we have some sort of an issue. So these are things to consider, as Jacques mentioned, on a blue sky day, when we're looking at our plans, maybe when we're exercising them in a tabletop. These are things that we want to at least to start to think about who is going to call whom in what order, and then we want to test it out ahead of time and see how that works out for us. So one of the things I love about being an emergency manager for water districts is that all y'all know how to deal with an emergency anyway. I do not need to come in and teach you how to deal with a disaster. An emergency for a water agency is a Tuesday. So we see that over here on the left with our dripping faucet. Something is dripping where it shouldn't be, or we're getting, SCADA messages that look weird, whatever that looks like, but we're very used to that. In the middle, we have a bigger thing. So that's kind of an something's actually broken. We're moving faster. We're keeping people from going home. We might be working overtime to fix that one. But then over here on the right-hand side with the flood, which is what that little graphic is supposed to be, that's the oh no moment, and that is the disaster. And the classic definition of a disaster is that it's something that happens so quickly, or it's a thing that is so large that it overwhelms our resources and we can't do it by ourselves. So if that's the case, then we want to think again about, as Jacques was saying, we want to have all these things written down. Are we working out of our standard operating procedures? Is it just a dripping something somewhere? Are we working out of our emergency standard operating procedures? It's something that's going to take a little bit longer. We might be working overtime. It's not our usual SOPs, but we're not completely overwhelmed. We're just in a hurry and things are looking a little worse than usual. Or are we over here on the right-hand side? When we're talking about plans for cybersecurity, any or all of these plans may come into play. So we might be talking about the incident response plan that is the overarching thing that's going to help us figure out what we're going to be doing when we've discovered that something is wrong. And once we get to a place where we have triaged that without erasing everything, we're going to start moving into our disaster recovery plan, and that has very specific timelines and goals. All of these are pieces of a much larger continuity of operations plan, because most of us can't pause serving water while we deal with our IT situation or our OT situation. And depending on how your organization thinks about these things, it may be your continuity of operations plan for the whole organization. It may be the business continuity plan for your department. So it just depends on context and how your agency talks about and thinks about and links all of these functions together. But any of these plans may come into play. So let's just get into ICS a little bit. ICS is typically something that local responders are using on the ground. We say in the field during an event or an incident. So you can use it for a planned event, or you can use it for an incident that's unexpected. You can use it for all types of organizations. It's something that helps us to coordinate the response amongst all of the people who need to coordinate, whoever that turns out to be. And so we see that given the context, depending on the type of water agency you are, what your relationships are, who you need to tell if you realize that you're having some sort of an cybersecurity incident, this will allow you to be flexible and make sure that you are integrating all of those people, all of your resources, all of your partner resources, maybe some of your rescue personnel's resources, all in one place. So for us, for a cyber incident, the field typically actually is the office, because that's where the disaster first occurs. It may cascade over into the field. So if we have a cyber incident where the intrusion has allowed a bad actor to affect our actual physical systems and to start changing levels in our treatment plant, or change how things are happening in our distribution systems, then we may really have something that's going on both in the actual physical field and also in the office. But typically, for a cyber incident, the field is actually the office, because that's what's happening. So ICS has these management characteristics that are important for different parts of the response, and they're important for different types of people who are helping with the response. We are going to highlight just a few of them today. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but some of these are really relevant for us today. So I'll just touch on some of those really quickly. Common terminology, I think we're all really familiar with. It's super important, and it's much more well defined, I think, in the cyberspace. You all could, say if you don't agree with that opinion, but one of the best examples of this I ever heard, I was sitting in an ICS class, and the best class is you go and it's one of the grizzled old timers who's been retired and seen it all. And this particular instructor came from law enforcement, and he told us a story about when he was a cadet himself and was in the academy. He was paired up with another person who had started the academy late for some reason. I can't remember why. And this person, who was his partner in the exercise, had come from the military. So that was his background. And they were doing a particular training exercise, and they were kind of learning how to be defensive in the field with firearms and stuff like this. And so the instructor says to his partner, who again was the person who had come from the military previously, he said, "Cover me." And he was going to move across the field. Well, if you don't know about this, in law enforcement, when you say "cover me," and I'm paraphrasing, but basically it means, put your weapon up and watch me as I go across and protect me from people who are going to shoot me, right? So basically, you are my defender. Turns out in the military, when you say "cover me," it means lay down a line of fire so that I can move across the ground and know that nobody's going to shoot me. And boy, was everybody surprised when they were saying the same words, but they meant different things. So I think certainly on the IT side, we have fewer misunderstandings of that magnitude, but it's very, very important to make sure that not only are we using common terminology, but the actual words that we're using mean the same thing. And that allows us to make sure that everybody, understands that the words that we're using for the functions, and we're going to look at the functions in a little bit, for the resources. So if I call you up and I say, "I need a generator," well, I mean, for anybody who's in ops, that is the most general thing I could possibly have said, right? Like that's basically me calling you up and saying, "I need a car." Well, no kidding. I mean, how big does it need to be? And what are you trying to power with it? And what connectors are you using? And do you know how to use it? Or do I need to send a person? So resource descriptions really need to have some commonality. And then for us in terms of facilities, it's not so much the type of building where the terminology needs to be common, but certainly the IT and the OT facilities, we need to be using the same words and meaning the same thing. So for ICS, we have 5 main function areas, and that's what I meant when we were talking about functions. So these are not job descriptions, these are functions. And so you can have any job description as long as you, or job title, as long as you have the skill set to do one of these functions. So for ICS, the one that's required is the incident commander. The rest of these are staffed up depending on which of them we need to deal with the incident. So operations, these are the folks that do the things. Here, I'll just show you the picture. Incident command is the boss. Operations are the people who do the things, fix the things. The planners are the folks who collect the information, make the plan, distribute it out so that everybody can see it. Logistics are the people who get the things. And then, of course, finance and admin are the trackers and the payers. So this is a typical structure. This is kind of the framework that you would adapt in order to make it really fit your context and your organization and your particular incident. So we may not need everybody every time, but this is basically what that looks like. Another really important thing, and this certainly is something that we naturally do in water, management by objectives. So if we came in and we had a broken main, just even in our heads, we would say, okay, our objectives today are, to contain the water and to do this and to do that. We might have 2 or 3 really big overarching ones. We'd make our plan, we'd send people out, we'd get going on it, and we'd check in with each other. So it's no different for a cybersecurity incident. Your response folks are going to say, okay, we want to contain the problem. We want to limit access. We want to do whatever is going to make sense given the type of cyber incident we think is happening. But we're always going to start with objectives rather than just reacting to all of the things that happen. Otherwise, it's a game of whack-a-mole that nobody really wants to play. So another really foundational thing about ICS is normally called the Incident Action Plan. And so people who have had ICS training before will have seen an IAP, and it really addresses the whole operational period. Typically, we run 8-hour or 12-hour operational periods at a time. And so oftentimes you'll have somebody coming in to relieve you at a certain point. But really, it's going to be looking at now the next 8 and 12 and maybe 24 hours. Those incident objectives that we just talked about are going to be in there. A list of the activities that are going to help us to achieve the objectives are going to be in there. Assignments. So an incident response plan is very, very similar on the cyber side as it is for a field response. If we need to have special communication protocols for a cyber incident, we could put that in the plan as well. Certainly, we're going to make sure that we write down who our needed resources are, and typically those are going to be human resources, but sometimes they're physical as well. So communication protocols for us for water in the field are often radio channels or cell chat groups, things like that, but for cyber it might look a little bit different. Span of control is an important idea in ICS because what happens a lot of times is when we're in a disaster, we don't have everybody in the office or in the field that we expect to have. If it's a disaster, a lot of times it'll be something that's affecting staff at a personal level too. And that might be a little bit more so the case here in California, where, as you will have seen, we're almost always on fire somewhere, or if we've had an earthquake. So we might have staff who can't come in because they're dealing with family and homes and things like that. So what happens is we get very busy. There are a lot of things that need to happen at once, and we may have many fewer people than we typically do. We need to guard against the idea that one person is going to be trying to supervise 20 people, though. It just never works well. And span of control helps us to kind of think about that when we're doing that incident response plan, assign human resources to those activities that are going to help get those objectives done, and also spread people out such that one person is not trying to do more than is humanly possible. For us on the cybersecurity side, if we're talking about an incident that may cover both IT and OT especially, we want to make sure the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. So span of control is also important to make sure that we're reporting out to leadership in every cycle whether that's an 8-hour cycle that we're working or a 12-hour cycle that we're working. We want to make sure that we're reporting out to our relief who's coming. And so we say, hey, in the last 8 or 12 hours, here are the things I did. Here are the things that you're going to want to look at. We also want to push that up the food chain and make sure that they're getting that information as we get it, as we vet it and validate it and make sure that it's accurate. Another important piece is resource management, and really for us, certainly we may need hardware, we may need pieces, parts, but we definitely need all the right humans. So human resources are a big deal, trying to make sure that we are tracking them, making sure that we are paying attention to how many hours they're working. We're making sure that we are coding timesheets and logs and things correctly for the incident response. Can be very important for things like dealing with insurance claims. If it was an actual declared disaster, if we were going to deal with state or federal assistance financially, we want to make sure we were tracking all of those things. So resource management is a big part of ICS. Integrated communications, I talked about those a little bit, but really we just want to make sure that all of the people who are helping us to deal with the issue are talking to each other. And so we want to have that interoperability of communications. And if we are in a situation where our comms are being affected by our cyber issue, we really need to make sure we have some redundancy and another way to get a hold of each other, because it's very common for water agencies to have field radios, right? And typically, even in the office, we'll have a radio so that if for whatever reason we couldn't use our cell phones, we could communicate back and forth between the field and the office. But if we were having an office phone issue or an internet connection issue, how are we going to get our vendors, CISA, FBI, whoever else is going to get involved, how are we going to get them connected in a way that's secure and make sure that that we control the access still, even if it's a different way than we normally do? Do we have that redundancy in some other way? So integrated communications are just as important in a cyber response as they are in some other type of a field response. So accountability, I've talked a little bit about making sure that we're tracking. I've talked about making sure that one person isn't supervising too many people. We want to make sure that we know who is working on the incident and who is not. Very important on a cybersecurity incident, because we're limiting access very, very strictly at this point, because probably an intrusion is part of our problem. So for accountability, we've got to make sure that everybody understands who is supposed to be working the incident, who is supposed to be reporting to who is supposed to be doing what activities. And then again, we want to make sure that we're keeping these unit logs so that we can report to each other as we come in to provide relief and up the food chain. So accountability kind of covers all of these different ideas, and it's something that's really, really important on the ICS side. In the field, it can be a situation where accountability keeps people safe. It helps us make sure we know where everybody physically is. We know if we need to go look for people, if we can't get a hold of them, if we're missing. So it's a little bit different than when we think about it on the cybersecurity side, but no less urgent, because knowing who's supposed to be there and when and why really can save us, especially if part of the intrusion is, and I'm sure we've talked about this a little bit earlier today, but if somebody's credentials have been compromised, and so we have what looks like an insider attack, this accountability can help us make sure that we're blocking even all of the inside accounts that we need to, and making sure that we're kind of isolating the problem. Information and intelligence management. Well, this is where the rubber meets the road for a cyber situation for sure. This is something that everybody is really familiar with. And the examples here are the ones, again, directly taken from the FEMA training on ICS. So the information and intelligence gathering, analysis, and management, I think the sources probably look very different for a cyber incident, but we do want to think about information and intelligence coming from internal sources, from external sources, from partners, from vendors, from news, from social media. They may come from a lot of different places. So it's very similar here. We want to gather up all of that information, and then we want to vet it, make sure it's actually valid before we act on it. So this is also something that really translates well to the cyber incident. So I'll just go ahead and move on to the NIMS methodology here. And so now we're kind of zooming out a little bit, right? And we're talking about a system that's going to allow us, especially if we have a cascading event that maybe starts in the office, we've had a blue screen of death somewhere, and we're having a hard time containing and controlling it. And pretty soon it moves over into the treatment plant, or it moves over into the distribution system or something like that. And so now we've got office problems, we've got field problems. Maybe we have communicated the problem to a partner. Maybe more than one water district shares a network, for example. That certainly is the case in my association. I have more than one agency that manages another operations system. And so maybe now our cascading events are 2 sets of cyber intrusions at 2 different water districts with 2 different service areas. They may even have different functions. So now we're talking about intrusion into potable water on one side, maybe into sanitary systems on another side. So something bigger like NIMS is going to give us that comprehensive approach, remind us about all of our different whole community activities that we need to be conducting while we're in this situation, and allow us to kind of get through it regardless of the size or complexity of the incident. So these are the 5 mission areas for NIMS. My first slide kind of mentioned that ICS is really response focused, but NIMS covers prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So it gives us a lot of procedures and ways to address the issues that we're having all the way through the full cycle. Flexibility, standardization, and unity of effort really are the guiding principles for NIMS. And one of the things I want to mention to everybody is that flexibility is the thing that is going to allow you to adapt NIMS and ICS, in fact, to your own water agency, such that all of the things you're doing are adapted directly and focused directly on how your agency works. So there's very little that's actually required. All of this is provided to give you resources, systems, processes, ways to organize information, ways to track information, organize people, collaborate in an effective way. But very little of it is required because they want you to adapt it to the way that you work, so that you are not duplicating efforts, so that you're not confusing people, but everybody's moving forward with this unity of effort. Everybody understands the goal, and everybody's working towards it in an orderly kind of a way. So the multi-agency coordination system, along with ICS and EOCs and a couple other components, are all part of NIMS. And the 2 most commonly used are MAT groups, and multi-agency coordination group is what Public Water Agencies Group actually is. So I am the MAT group coordinator for my water agencies. But today, really, we're going to talk a little bit about the EOC. And for you, an EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, may be called a Department Operations Center if you're a city or a county water district. So you are a jurisdiction department. That may be a DOC for you. It may not be an EOC. City or the county may open up their EOC. Then you may, in parallel, be opening up your DOC. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But either way, the EOC, the DOC, and the MAT group, they don't do the incident command. They are not making the decisions. They are actually there to support all of the response people who are trying to fix the problem and help to get the things done. So it can be physical or it can be virtual. We saw a lot of virtual EOCs and DOCs during COVID, for example. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get all the information from the field, put it back up into a report so that everybody can see how it's going, what we think is going to happen in the next 8, 12, 24 hours, what our objectives are, so that we can all be collaborating together, so that we can see what the needs are and work on fulfilling them, so the folks in the field can just keep on fixing what's broken and try to move forward and get the thing done. So this really is something that you can use at all different levels. And when you are thinking about an incident, you're always going to have that EOC ICS interface, because wherever your field is, whether it's in the office because it's a contained IT cyber incident, for example, or whether it also includes the field, we're running an ICS structure somewhere to do the response. And then the EOC or the doc is providing that support function. So again, we're thinking about adapting these things and using that flexibility in such a way that we're only staffing the functions that we need to do the response. We're using the terminology that we have developed within our field. So water has some very specific terminology. Cyber has some very specific terminology. We may want to make sure that we're communicating those things to each other as we move forward together in the response. But that way, this interface between the EOC or the doc and the field running the ICS structure is the thing that really helps us to share that information and to collaborate. So I have here a great big emergency operations team org chart, and this is for one of my larger water districts that has lots of humans. I have a teeny tiny district that has 5 humans, so their org chart looks a little bit different. And this one is obviously if we had an incident in the field. So as I mentioned, we would only staff these functions based on the scope and the scale of the incident, but these are the possible functions that we might want to have in that water district's EOC to respond to an earthquake, for example, where we just were completely overwhelmed. So if we're thinking about having a cyber incident, our org chart here is going to look a little bit different, right? This is where we will start to see all of those IT and OT support functions. So we would probably have people who are doing the response with the IT and OT credentials, but then here in support, we probably would also see IT and OT support functions, helping them and trying to make sure they have what they need, translating a lot of what's happening to the folks in the water district so that they can communicate to customers, to the public, to the board. We talked about that whole community piece at the very beginning. So depending on the types of cyber functions we would need to add in here, they would likely they might even actually be almost across the board, because I could imagine that we would have maybe somebody that needed to do logistics if we needed hardware. We would certainly have a planning and intelligence person on the IT or OT side. And then again, for sure in operations, since operations are the folks who do the things. So I am going to leave it there, and I'm happy to take questions whenever we get to that point. But thank you again for having me. I'm so privileged to be here.
Alex, thank you so much for that very insightful presentation. I really appreciated how you applied those complex NIMS and ICS principles and made them specific to a cyber attack, and the steps and principles that we can take so that we can effectively respond. Bram, are there any questions for Alex?
No questions at this point. Alex, thank you so much. Michael, thank you so much. Going forward here, if you do have any questions for our past 3 presenters, please do drop them in the questions box here. We will get those questions to the presenters to be answered as soon as possible. For now, we're going to take a quick little 15-minute break here. When we come back, we'll come back at 10:45 a.m. Mountain Time with Christopher Chen from the EPA. We're going to be switching focus to look at risk and resiliency assessments as well as emergency response plan requirements. So come back for that. We'll be back in just a bit, but go ahead, stretch your legs, get some water, and feel free to drop some questions in the chat. We will address those very quickly. And thanks again to all of our presenters so far. Alex, I do have a question for you if you are still around.
I'm here.
Excellent. First question that has just come in is how often should someone update their ICS plan?
So we want to be, I mean, this is not the answer that anybody wants, but we want to be looking at whatever that emergency or disaster response plan is every year, unfortunately, friends. If you have an incident, that's the time I would do it, right? So by the time you get to the end of that, some of the cleanup, let's go ahead and work in a review of the emergency response plan or the incident response plan. And then if we're lucky enough to not have something that big, I would look at it every year and I program it to something else that we already do, right? So I used to work at a pretty big water district, and we reviewed our emergency response plan every year around the same time we did our evacuation drill. There are folks in the state of California. We have a thing called the Great Shakeout here where we practice ducking, covering, and holding on during an earthquake. I recommend that the water districts here look at their plan after the Great Shakeout. So pick a time of the year when it makes sense and you're not up to your eyeballs in alligators. If nothing else, you want to be looking at the perishable information, right? So we're looking at names, job titles, phone numbers, vendors, partners, all of that stuff. And I tend to put those things either at the very front or the very back, so it's all in one place. And that way we can say, okay, who retired, who moved along, who are our new folks. That way, at least you've got all of that stuff updated in there. And then if you've had the opportunity to be part of an exercise, or if you have upgraded technology or equipment, if you've added functions to your water district, all of those things are things you're thinking about. What changes have we made in what we do that we might need to look at in this plan? And those 3 or 4 things will really get you where you're going, and it shouldn't take you more than a couple of days every year to take a look at it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. And Krishna, I see your question in here as well. There are PDFs of all these presentations in the handouts section here on GoToWebinar. Anthony's, Jacques, and Alex's presentations are all under one file. It says Planning for and Responding to Cyber Attacks. You can download that, but we'll also be sending out a share file after this workshop is over, and that should have all of the presentations individually as far as PDF versions go. And then again, this whole workshop is being recorded and will be posted on the ADEQ YouTube channel in the coming week or so. So you'll be able to revisit that presentation. And if you have any further questions for Alex, her email is in the, it's on the agenda. So you can download the agenda file as well and contact any of our presenters today with follow-up questions. Feel free to keep leaving questions in the questions panel if you have any, but we'll be back at 10:45 to resume with the EPA. All right, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back from our little 15-minute break here. We're going to keep things going now with our cybersecurity and emergency preparedness webinar. Just as one more reminder for you operators, make sure you download the agenda for your PDHs today. Christopher, if you are ready, I can pass screen control to you and we can get this next presentation going.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Looks good.
Okay. Am I only sharing the PowerPoint?
Yes, yeah, we just see the presentation.
Okay, perfect. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Chen. I'm a drinking water inspector for the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Region 9. I'm here today to discuss risk and resilience assessment and emergency response plans. And these are two documents that are required pursuant to Section 1433 of the Safe Drinking Water Act. I'll be referring to risk and resilience assessment as RRAs and emergency response plans as ERPs, since it's a lot shorter. Section 1433 was amended by America's Water Infrastructure Act, Section 2013 on October 23rd, 2018, and it requires community water systems serving more than 3,300 people to develop or update RRAs and ERPs. The requirements of Section 1433 are directly implemented by EPA, as this section of the Safe Drinking Water Act cannot be delegated to a primacy agency such as the state of Arizona. Okay. Section 1433 has a few different requirements for community water systems. The meat of the requirements are the components that are required for an RRA and for they're spot out within the first couple portions of Section 1433. And I'll cover the specifics in future slides. Section 1433 also requires these two documents revised and recertified every 5 years. There's also a requirement for water systems to coordinate with local emergency planning committees, which were established under the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act in 1986, to the extent possible, when preparing or revising an RRA or ERP.
Really quickly, Chris, I believe are still seeing your first cover slide here. I'm not sure if those have progressed on our end.
Oh, okay. Let's see, screen sharing's now. Oh, let me see. Let me try that again. Sorry.
No worries.
All right, is it on now?
Yes, I do see slide 2 there now.
Okay.
Perfect, that's working.
Okay. All right. Let's see, where was I? Okay. All right. So, while this doesn't require the emergency planning committee information isn't required to be in the ERP, it typically makes sense for that to be incorporated into the ERPs to incorporate that coordination effort. Water systems must maintain these documents for 5 years, which essentially means that water systems must have these documents available for appropriate system personnel and also have these documents be available during an EPA inspection for review. These documents must be maintained in a secure location and not sent to EPA. So I want to emphasize that EPA is not collecting these documents. We don't want to receive an email if we inspect a water system. We're not expecting you to provide a copy to EPA to take back to the office. It will only be reviewed while on site. Okay, so the first round of the RRA and ERP certification deadlines occurred in the 2020 and 2021. The next 5-year certification period is 2025 to 2026. Some community water systems will be developing RRAs and ERPs for the first time during the 2025 certification cycle, if they've opened operations recently, had an increase in population served to greater than 3,300 people, or if you also serve 3,300 and greater, but your public water system type has been classified now as a community water system. Otherwise, most systems involved for this have likely created an RA and ERP during the first 2020 cycle, and now need to review and revise these documents by the deadlines listed here. You'll notice that RRAs are due earlier for larger water system sizes, with the first deadline coming up for community water systems serving over 100,000 people by March 31st, 2025. I also highlight here that ERP deadlines are always 6 months after the RRA deadline. And the intent of this regulation is that water systems should first develop the RRA to determine the vulnerabilities to the system, and then the information from the assessment should then inform the development of the ERP. I don't know, I'm having trouble with the slideshow here. Okay. All right, let's see. Let's get into the details of what's actually required in an RA. So an RA must assess the risk to and the resilience of essentially all assets of a water system from 2 primary categories, and those are malevolent acts and natural hazards. Malevolent acts are risks caused by ill-intentioned persons, such as cyber attacks, sabotage, or attacks on the facility or on personnel. Natural hazards include extreme heat, wildfires, snowstorms, and floods. On the left-hand side, you can see it must include assessment of all physical assets that you typically think of, such as source, pipes, treatment, storage facilities. But systems must also assess other assets, including electronic systems, the system's monitoring practices, the financial infrastructure itself, chemical handling, and the overall operations and maintenance. I want to really emphasize the right side of this slide. I found that most systems primarily, when they're developing the RA and thinking about risk, they're thinking of the physical assets and don't fully consider the other assets essential to function, which are on the other side of this slide here. During my reviews of RRAs during EPA inspections, I've particularly noticed that systems have not adequately assessed the financial infrastructure, such as the billing systems, meters, other financial components. Instead, kind of think of it more as just the dollar values of the physical assets. There have been numerous cyber attacks on water systems, billing systems in the past. So it's something that we want to see that water systems are considering when they're evaluating the risk. The monitoring practices, and to a lesser extent the O&M, are commonly missed components as well. How can the malevolent acts and natural hazards potentially disrupt the system's ability to monitor the system? And that includes compliance monitoring, process control, tank level, pressure, all those essential monitoring that's needed to assess the health and condition of the water system. All right, I don't know why every time I change the slide it does this, but apologies for that. All right, so And I'm not going to go into great detail on how to conduct an RA, as EPA will actually be hosting a webinar about this next month. I've provide more details later on. EPA's AWEA website. So AWEA is shorthand for the America's Water Infrastructure Act. We have a website that has excellent resources for how to conduct an RA for smaller water systems, and I mean that in a relative sense. And so in this case, 50,000 persons or less. EPA offers what we call a small water system RRA checklist to help systems develop an RRA that meets all the requirements. And I've included a screenshot of that checklist here. This document essentially goes through every asset that one should consider, such as the monitoring practices or finished water storage facilities, and whether this asset faces significant risk from an established list of malevolent acts and natural hazards. If the system considers it a significant risk, then a detailed narrative description should be filled out. Water systems can use the checklist as the RA, or can use it as the basis for developing a more fully fleshed out RA. I'd also recommend including a brief description of a given threat that is deemed as not a significant risk as well, so other readers, such as other system personnel who weren't there for the development of the document, can understand why it was determined, for example, like that flooding wasn't a risk worth further consideration in the RA. Okay, hopefully the correct slide is showing. So for larger water systems, we have a tool available, and it's called the VSAT, which is shorthand for the Vulnerability Self-Assessment Tool. This tool is not a narrative assessment like the RA checklist on the previous slide, but a quantitative assessment. The VSAT defines overall risk by considering threat, vulnerability, and consequence, while also considering any existing countermeasures. It has what is called asset threat pairings and assigns numerical values for each. For example, an asset threat pair would be like storage tank 1 and paired with a threat such as a wildfire threat. And a threat is any specific event that can impair a system from serving potable water, such as cyber attacks, floods, power outages. And then there's vulnerability, and so that's the likelihood of a specific threat, if it occurs, would damage or impair the operations of the asset. For a malevolent threat, this value is the likelihood that an attempted attack would be successful. For a natural hazard, this value is the likelihood that the threat would impact operation of the utilities asset. When doing these calculations, there's also consequences. And so consequences are the adverse impacts that result when a threat occurs and damages or impairs the operation of the utilities asset. This includes economic costs, of course, to the utility and the service area due to equipment damage and loss of water services, but consequences can also include the potential for injuries and fatalities from accidental or intentional contamination of drinking water, or a hazardous gas. Within the VSAT tool, there's also something called countermeasures, and so countermeasures are systems or practices that reduce the risk from a threat to the utilities assets. I personally haven't gone through the VSAT tool myself, but as I alluded to before, EPA will be hosting a webinar that provides a walkthrough demonstration on using the VSAT, the RRA checklist, and the ERP template available on EPA's. To develop these documents for the first time, or you want to see it walk through and ensure that you update the docs to help assure compliance with Section 1433 of the Safe Drinking Water Act, then this webinar could be helpful for that in-depth walkthrough on how to use these tools correctly. All right, so there is cybersecurity. So there's a good amount of discussion about this today. And EPA has also been focused on cybersecurity the past couple of years. So a system must conduct a cybersecurity assessment as it's expressly in the regulations. When considering cybersecurity, it should assess both the operational and informational technology assets. Typically, the most important OT for systems is the SCADA system, if the water system has one. IT assets can include financial systems, computers used by system personnel, databases. Previous presenters seem to cover this topic pretty well, so I don't think I need to go into too much detail on that. And this slide includes a link with resources about how to conduct a self-assessment for cybersecurity, or potentially, having a third party conduct that assessment for the water system. Every time, huh? All right. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, there's also the ERP, and the ERP should incorporate findings from the risk and resilience assessment. So these components must be included in the ERP. So the first one is strategies and resources to improve resilience, including physical security and cybersecurity. I want to emphasize a couple of things here, and it's a strategy and resources. A number of water systems sometimes don't really notice resources there. And so we're looking to see that there's an evaluation on what resources are going to be invested to improve the resilience as well. Secondly, I want to emphasize cybersecurity here again. Both RA and ERP need to have a clear discussion on cybersecurity, or the documents may not be in compliance with Section 1433. The second requirement is plans, procedures, and equipment for responding to a malevolent act or natural hazard. For this requirement, I'll highlight the word equipment, as it's easy to miss, but we're looking for these plans to be explicit about equipment available. And we understand that equipment availability may be more dynamic than this plan, especially over the course of 5 years. And so, maybe a more frequently updated, maintained equipment inventory could be considered as, part of an addendum to the document and stored elsewhere, as long as it's still available for EPA if we were to inspect, and of course for system personnel, and they all understand where that list of available equipment is. The requirement is actions, procedures, and equipment to lessen the impact of a malevolent act. And this section actually includes a couple of examples, since that could include looking for an alternative source water, exploring relocation of intakes, flood protection barriers. And so the bottom line here is we're looking for a description on mitigation actions here. The last requirement for the ERP is strategies to detect malevolent acts or natural hazards. So how is the system going to detect or identify that a malevolent act or natural hazard is occurring or soon arriving, so that the system can prepare and respond appropriately? Is the ERP versus EOP slide being shared right now?
It is, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this might be, I think, one of the most important slides for this presentation, as a common issue I've observed during my inspection, specifically in Arizona, is that water systems are confusing the ERP with the EOP, which is the Emergency Operations Plan. And I want to make very clear that the EOP is a different document and a different requirement than the ERP. So the EOP is a document that has specific requirements pursuant to Arizona regulations. And the ERP has requirements that are per federal regulations, the Safe Drinking Water Act. And there's distinctly different requirements. A water system can decide to combine the requirements of the EOP and ERP into one document, but you would need to ensure that the requirements for both Arizona's regulations and EPA's regulations are included. So I recommend that you check your records to see if you have an ERP or if your water system only has an EOP. Water systems have provided the EOP thinking that it was the same thing as the ERP, and that's not the case. So if you certified completion in the first cycle and you actually only complete an EOP, then you must develop an ERP and then certify for during this next 2025 cycle. Okay, so EPA has several free resources that are available online to help water systems comply with Section 1433 requirements. So we're in the process of continually updating these documents for the 2025 compliance cycle. And so the three resources in orange are meant to help water utilities with RA requirements. First one listed here is the baseline information on malevolent acts for community water systems. And so this document helps water systems identify malevolent acts to include in their RRAs and estimate the threat likelihood for those malevolent acts. As I mentioned before, there's the VSAT, and again, we recommend that water systems that serve over 50,000 people use this quantitative e-tool to develop their RRA. And a little note for this is that to ensure that you save your password for your VSAT analysis, as EPA is unable to help recover lost passwords. We have this e-tool deliberately designed for data to be stored locally to protect user privacy. And so the onus is on the user to save the data locally and remember the username and password. As mentioned before, we also have the small system RRA checklist, and we recommend that again for systems serving 50,000 or less, and it is a qualitative risk assessment tool. And it has fillable tables and will walk water systems step by step through the process of assessing the risk. We also have some resources in blue. So there's the emergency response guidance and template. And so this walks utilities through fulfilling Section 1433's ERP requirements. And this template can be easily modified to meet any water systems needs, and it's recommended for water systems of any size. The resources in green are other helpful resources. We have a fact sheet, provides a quick overview of the requirements and deadlines, technical assistance primers, a resource for if there's any technical assistance providers on here who work with water systems one-on-one to develop these two documents. And then there's also an FAQ that compiles a list of frequently asked questions that goes into details. And if you have any questions, it might be helpful to start with them, and hopefully it can answer your questions. Okay, so I want to make clear though that these tools are not required, and the section does not have a specified standard when developing the documents. We do recommend the use of the tools that I've discussed and other tools from reputable water organizations to ensure the development of sufficient RAs and ERPs. Even if you use these tools, it doesn't guarantee you met all the requirements, as it's the water system's responsibility to ensure that the information developed from these tools are adequate. So for those of you who developed and certified your RA and ERP 5 years ago during the 2020 cycle, you'll need to review, update as needed, and recertify before the applicable certification deadlines for your size category. The requirements for RAs and ERPs have not changed. However, for your water system, the landscape of the threats facing your water system in the water sector in general has changed over the past 5 years. So we really want to emphasize the importance of conducting a thorough review and making substantial updates to your RA and ERP. Updating your documents thoroughly will help ensure that when an emergency strikes, that you have useful documents. We encourage community water systems to consider adding to bolstering existing sections based on the latest knowledge of emerging concerns. A key example of a threat to highlight is cybersecurity for this 2025 cycle. It's a rapidly evolving threat. EPA has free resources available online with information on a wide variety of threats of concern to water systems, including cybersecurity, supply chain resilience, climate change, and more. These free resources can be used to help bolster sections of your RA and ERP. Okay, so as stated before, the RA and ERP must be updated every 5 years. We're talking about a lot of things can change in 5 years. Maybe you've learned about emerging threats you didn't think about before. I think there's been a lot of emergencies that have been high profile over the years, and I think there's lessons that could potentially be learned. The island of Maui didn't consider wildfire a significant risk, but we all saw the tragic devastation that occurred there. And so I'm certain that many water systems in Hawaii now are thinking about how to respond to wildfires on the islands that they didn't consider before. Other recent emergencies can help instruct how your water system may want to respond based off of seeing how other water systems responded. As everyone knows, there has been the ongoing Los Angeles wildfires, which had impact on numerous water systems in Southern California. And so it could be lessons there for how your water system can prepare and respond to wildfires and just catastrophes in general. And so once these documents are updated or written for the first time, must maintain a copy of these documents. Again, appropriate personnel should be able to access these documents. So you want it to be secure, but you don't want it to be locked away and just never used for anything. And if we conduct an inspection, these documents must be maintained and available for EPA to review on site. And again, this is every 5 years. So even after this 2025 cycle, every 5 years, this cycle will continue on. So the next one will be 2030, 2035, and so on. Okay, almost done here. So there's 3 ways to certify completion of your RA and ERP. These include the electronic submission through EPA secure online portal. And this is the preferred method for EPA, and I think generally for most water systems. It's the quickest way to get your certification to EPA, and is the only method where you will be sent a confirmation email of receipt for your records. And you'll also be able to view your submission history at any time by logging into your account. We also do allow for email and regular mail submissions by submitting PDF certification statements. I want to just emphasize again that do not send your actual RA and ERP to EPA. The requirement is only to certify that you've done these documents. And the reason for this is that these plans often contain sensitive information. And so we want to safeguard that information by keeping these documents in a secure location at the utility. If we require the collection of these documents, then EPA would have a repository of all the water systems sensitive documents, and that would be a needless vulnerability for all water systems. Okay, and then lastly, this is just some contact information. I had my contact information at the very beginning slide. If you want to reach out to me, again, I work for Region 9, which covers California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands. But also, I've listed here some other good contact information at our EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C., and they would be able to answer probably the questions better than I could. So I've listed those here. I just wanted to apologize again for the slide difficulty. Sorry to have to keep going in and out, and it kept pausing on me and then kicking me out. But thank you for your patience on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Christopher. The technical difficulties are just part of the webinars. It's bound to happen, but thank you very much for pushing through and getting us all that great information. I do have one question for you. The question is, there are 2 water agencies in the Phoenix area that were visited by the EPA in the past 12 months. What is the EPA looking for, and are there more visits planned for the future? So EPA, we're continuing our inspections that are focused on Section 1433. So that's happening nationally, so not just Arizona. So I would anticipate that EPA will continue to go out to Arizona and other states and territories and conducting inspections. Some of them will be only focused on review of these 2 documents, so the RA and ERP, but also at times we'll be out there conducting inspections where we'll be looking at those documents in conjunction with a more comprehensive inspection of the water systems, assets, and all of this will be in coordination with ADEQ as the primacy agency. Did I answer all of that? I think there was a first part of the question. Yeah, it was. I think you got it. It's what's the EPA looking for, and are there more visits planned for the future? Yeah. So yeah, more visits planned, and then yeah. So looking to have those 2 documents be available. Again, the RA and ERP, and want to emphasize one last time, the ERP is different than the EOP. Awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher. We'll pass on now to our final presenter for this morning. We have Amanda Overholt from ADWR is going to bring us some information on drought contingency planning. If you're ready, Amanda, I can pass the screen to you.
Yes, I'm ready.
Excellent.
All right. One second. I'll move my screen. All right. Wrong one. There we go. All right, can everybody see that?
That looks good, Amanda.
Perfect. All right, everybody. So hopefully we can see these slides move. I know there's some technical difficulties, so hopefully it doesn't affect me, but we'll see. So I'm Amanda Overholt. I'm the Community Water Systems Coordinator here at ADWR. I've been at ADWR about 2 years in the Community Water Systems program specifically. And today we will be talking a little bit about drought mitigation and planning in regards to community water systems. So to focus. go to the next slide from here. There we go. Is that not working either?
That worked. I see the next slide.
Okay, sounds good. There might be a lag, it looks like. So the Community Water System program was initiated by the Governor's Drought Task Force in 2005 under Arizona House Bill 2277. The requirements that were recommended by the Drought Task Force included water system reporting and system water plans, and this was with the goal to help systems reduce their vulnerability and plan for future water shortages in the future. So the CWS program was a measure passed through the legislative process, and therefore ADWR is statutorily required to regulate these systems by definition. You can find the CWS program's pertinent statutes under Arizona Revised Statutes 45341 to 45343 under Title 14. So what is a community water system? A community water system is a type of public water system that is classified by ADEQ. There's multiple types of public water systems, but community water systems are type C, so they're a specific type. They are any water system that serves 15 or more connections or 25 or more year-round residents. This is ADWR specific. I know ADEQ has different definitions of what a large system and small system is, but here at ADWR under the CWS program by statute, a large community water system has a population of more than 1,850 people, and a small community water system has that population or less. Currently, I regulate about 757 active systems, and it's just me. So I am quite busy, but I really do love working with these systems. I get to see all the parts of Arizona, kind of get a broad picture of what is happening around the state with these community water systems. So we'll kind of jump in to a little bit more drought related things. Arizona's drought history, we've had 3 severe droughts in the 20th century and beyond. Because we live in the desert, we recognize that drought is a natural occurrence in our climate, and the question really isn't if we'll experience a drought, but when, and when will another drought start again. In the 20th century, like I said, we've experienced 3 severe droughts, one in the early 1900s, one in the 1950s, and the current ongoing drought that began in the mid-1990s, which scientists and local climatologists think that began actually in 1994 after a very wet winter in 1993. Every watershed will have a different onset of drought based on statewide rainfall patterns, but Arizona as a whole has been in a drought for over 20 years. All right, so in 1999, we're going to talk about the Drought Interagency Coordinating Group, which is also what we call the ICG. In 1999, a drought emergency was declared by Governor Jane D. Hull, activating the state of Arizona's emergency response and recovery plan, promoting aid in drought-stricken areas in the state. In 2007, the declaration was reaffirmed through an executive order, further promoting water conservation in all sectors of the state, requesting assistance for those impacted, and ordering state agencies to implement their water use reduction plans. The ICG last met on November 4th, 2024, and unanimously recommended that both drought declarations remain in place. If you are interested in attending any of the ICG meetings, they are public, and we always have the meeting agenda, summaries, and presentations on our ADWR ICG Drought webpage. The next meeting date has yet to be determined, but it will take place in May of this year. Next, we have the Monitoring Technical Committee, or the MTC. The State Drought Monitoring Technical Committee is responsible for gathering data in the state about drought, climate, weather, producing drought status reports, and disseminating that information to anyone from land managers, policymakers, and the public as well. The NTC and ADWR coordinate to improve the accessibility to drought information by resource managers, state decision makers, and the public. This is to further communication. Information is updated on ADWR's drought status webpage, and you can view that weekly, monthly, and quarterly to see all of the updates. The Drought Monitoring Technical Committee is co-chaired by our state climatologist, Erin Saffel, and the lead forecaster for the National Weather Service of Phoenix, Mark O'Malley. The last drought MTC meeting took place on January 13th. Both short and long-term drought conditions were discussed, as well as agency updates from Salt River Project and ADWR. The next meeting will be held on April 9th, 2025, from 10 to 12. So to kind of culminate all this together, we have what we call our Drought Task Force and drought reports. So in partnership with different drought groups, ADWR produces an annual drought preparedness report for Arizona residents and the governor's office as well for the previous water year. We published the most recent 2024 Arizona drought report in early December. This report includes a summary of Arizona's drought status for the past water year and an outlook for the next water year. It includes drought emergency designation information, highlights drought conditions and preparedness activities, including water supply, drought planning for community water systems, outreach, education, participation in regional and national efforts, and assistance. You can find the 2024 Arizona Drought Preparedness Plan and all of the other drought preparedness annual reports by visiting ADWR's drought program page. So to get involved more in the community side of drought and drought planning, we do have something in the state called Local Drought Impact Groups, or LDIGs. They are county level groups that coordinate drought public awareness. They provide impact assessment information to local and state leaders. They implement and initiate local mitigation and response options. They are coordinated locally. And currently the only LDIG is the PEMA LDIG. The PEMA LDIG became an active component of county operations in 2006. This group works to address the impacts of drought in various sectors, including agriculture, ranching, wildfire, hydrology, and even flooding. These are open meetings and members of the public are interested parties are welcome to attend any of these. Meeting for information is available on the Pima County LDIG webpage. So here are some resources that we have on drought in the state on various websites. So we have on ADWR's drought page, we have our drought data dashboard, which kind of is comprised of all of the drought data that we've had over the years, including these Arizona long-term drought and short-term drought maps to the right. You can find these at ASU's website, which is where our state climatologist, Erin Saffel, is residing. So she does all the long-term drought maps. And then we also have short-term drought maps from UNL, University of Nebraska Lincoln. And they do all the short-term ones. And so we kind of put that all together in this drought dashboard there on the left. So how can this information that I just spoke about be applied to system drought preparedness and planning? There's a few ways, and there's some required under legislation for the CWS program, which we'll talk about next. All community water systems are required to submit system water plans every 5 years on January 1st. Our most recent system water plan was due January 1st, 2022 for large systems, and January 1st, 2023 for small systems. Systems in close proximity with collaborative efforts may file a system water plan jointly, which is what I see very often. It is comprised of 3 parts: the water supply plan, which is mainly infrastructure questions, your supply and demand information, things like that. The most relevant section that we'll talk about today is our drought preparedness plan, which is basically for any water systems to determine their drought measures, plan through these drought emergencies, prevent drought emergencies, things like that. And then the third section is the water conservation plan, which just includes feasible conservation measures and best management practices that a system is currently implementing. What do we look for? System supply and demand data, and system-specific drought evaluation and mitigation, including those feasible conservation measures that I mentioned earlier. So diving a little bit into the drought preparedness side of the system water plan, the purpose of the drought preparedness plan is to prevent shortage emergencies during drought conditions, and is to evaluate your water demand reductions that can be implemented in response to these specific drought levels that impacts certain systems. I will mention here that the drought preparedness plan or system water plan is not the same as ADEQ's EOP or emergency operations plan. Emergency operations plans are more for planning through an emergency and not just preventing an emergency like the drought preparedness plan is. The drought plan requirements, some of the overarching requirements are contact info, the person responsible for operations during that drought, any water supply stressors for your system, your drought indicators, your drought stages, triggers and management measures, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next slide, any drought communication methods with customers, and any development of emergency water supplies. So the drought preparedness plan, and this is based on Arizona's original drought preparedness plan for the state. This is mainly for systems to help them through the drought preparedness plan, which includes indicators, triggers, and management measures. These are kind of the three basic things that every drought preparedness plan requires to have the most robust prevention. So the first one is your indicators, and they all connect. So indicators are variables that describe your specific drought conditions that will cause stress to your system's water supply. This includes, or for example, well levels, your stream flow levels, if you use surface water, and even range and forest conditions in your area. Your triggers are the specific values of those indicators that initiate each drought phase. So for example, when the depth of your water is 500 feet in your well, drought stage X is triggered. For the drought stages, we'll get into a little bit more of that in the next slide. But the next part is management measures. This is your specific plan of action, which your system's management plans undertake when drought impacts the system's water supply. There should be specific measures to reduce water demands based on the available supply. So, for example, when drought stage X is triggered, we prohibit non-essential water use. It is important to note that all of these indicators, triggers, and management measures should be specific to the individual system. Arizona is a very diverse state ecologically, and we like to see systems not just have a standardized plan as other systems, but have something very specific to them in their area, because all their needs are different. You'll see a different drought preparedness plan in Flagstaff than you would in Tucson. So diving a little bit more into drought stages. For the system water plan itself, we require at least 3 stages of drought preparedness planning. That would basically cover your normal management measures, your maintenance levels. Your stage 1 is kind of more precautionary. Stage 2 is a little bit more severe, and then stage 3 is your most severe drought level phase that you would implement. So like I said, stage 0 is your normal management measures, precautionary stage 1, stage 2 is intermediate. This is recommended when there is a possibility that supplies may not meet demand. That may not be happening yet. Stage 3 is your advanced measures. This is recommended when there is a good probability that supplies will not meet demand or are already not meeting demand. All right. So one of the most important parts of drought preparedness is drought awareness and communication. Not everyone is up to date with the most recent drought information. You know, they may not have the resources that I spoke of before about the long-term drought maps, the short-term drought maps, the ICG, the MTCs, the drought preparedness annual reports, things like that. So communication plans should be in place before drought conditions occur, and they should be easy for the public, the general public, to understand. Keeping the public well informed on drought conditions allows the public to be able to take proactive steps to mitigate the response in response to drought, the impacts of drought in your system in your area. There's various ways that you can communicate drought with your customers, but here's some examples. Drought information with your water bill. You can post local drought condition information on the website, utilizing some of those resources that I aforementioned. There's free publications and newsletters you guys can do, as well as community meetings. I do see this quite often with smaller systems who are like HOAs or something, or small subdivisions, where they meet monthly and they discuss the drought status and their water system plan as a whole. And here are some of those links to the drought planning resources that I mentioned before. So you can use these from the handout here. That is on GoToWebinar's handout dropdown, and you'll be able to click on these and it'll take you right to the correct resource. And with that, I will take any questions. I will say here's a few contacts, including me on the left there, but we also at ADWR have a specified drought program coordinator, Maggie Martin. She is currently on maternity leave, but she will be back soon, and either of us will be able to answer your questions or direct you appropriately. And then I also have my supervisor, Lainey Meeker, on there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda, for the presentation. We do have one question in here so far. Diana asks, does ADWR provide information for the community? We are planning a joint public meeting between the local water department and the local WWTP.
Sorry, can you ask that again? You kind of cut out. I'm not sure if it's my connection.
Yeah, no worries. The question was, does ADWR provide information for the community? We are planning a joint public meeting between the local water department and the local WWTP.
Yeah, so the ICG and MTCs are specifically for the public to be informed. So if you did want to get more involved or us to provide you some more resources, definitely our drought program coordinator can get you more involved and provide more information on that, because she runs all of those. But specifically for community specific, like drought planning and information and education, I do host what we call community water systems workshops throughout the state. We are doing our third one in technically Pinal County, but we have extended the invitation to Pima County water providers as well. You don't have to be from those areas, but it will be located in Eloy, so kind of center midpoint between Pinal and Pima counties. But we do plan to have more in the future, and we do like to work with watershed groups and other state agencies, including ADEQ and Water Infrastructure Finance Authority of Arizona, to provide kind of a robust, fully comprehensive amount of resources for everyone, including drought. In the Pinal Community Water System Workshop that we have coming up on February 27th, we will also be having Santa Cruz Watershed Collaborative present, and they're going to be presenting on drought-specific issues within their community and any information, and provide resources for that Santa Cruz watershed, which does kind of integrate with both Pinal and Pima counties. But yes, like I said, we will be offering more resources throughout the state as well. And I can provide any information on that in the chat as well.
Awesome, thank you. One more question. Does the same planning apply to tribal water?
Good question. Tribal water is federally regulated, so any legislation on that would be regulated through the EPA. So the CWS program does not regulate any tribal water systems.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, that looks like all of the questions in here at the moment. Let me move back over here. Thank you again, Amanda.
No
That's what we
problem.
got for this morning. Those are our presenters. If you do have any other questions for them in the next couple minutes here as we're closing things out, feel free to drop those into the questions drop down. If not, you can always follow up at a later time. Again, operators, remember to download that agenda. That will be in the handout section, and that is your ticket for the 4 PDHs for today's workshop. So please download that. It's also got all the contact information for all of the presenters today. Again, this will be uploaded onto our ADEQ YouTube channel in the coming week or two. So keep an eye out for that if you wish to share any of the presentations with colleagues or otherwise. And there are also the presentations themselves, the PowerPoint slides, the PDFs available in the handouts section, as well as a share file that will be going out this afternoon as well with links to the same. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to email azopcert at azdeq.gov or call us at 602-771-0100. We do have some other events coming up in the near future. Keep an eye out for those. Remember to get on our Qualtrics mailing list for regular updates onto when webinars and in-person workshops will be offered by ADEQ. These are always free events, free PDHs for you from ADEQ. We'll have an in-person 2-day capacity development workshop in the near future, as well as another in-person cybersecurity focused event later on in April. So keep an eye out for those as we announce them. And thank you everyone for coming. We do appreciate you for showing up and learning. Hopefully you got some good information today. Zach Tate, I do see your question, how do we download the handout? On the GoToWebinar panel, there should be a section that says handouts. It should be a little drop down that you can click and download any of those files. If you're not able to see that, every once in a while, GoToWebinar doesn't display that for everyone for reasons I have yet to figure out. But I will be sending out a share file as well with all the presentations. And if you need a copy of the agenda specifically, feel free to shoot us an email or reply when that share file goes out and we'll get you the agenda. Everyone else, thank you very much. I will be closing out the webinar here, but thanks again for attending and have a wonderful weekend.
You too, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michael.